transcribed, and we will be posting the meeting video on Oregon website either next week or the following week. So we'll do introductions real quick. Trying to pull up the list of the names. So I'm Brian Robertson, Supervisor of Resource Planning. I'm just going to go down the list that I have here of the people that have joined the call. So Abe.
Hi, Abe Abdallah, Utility Analyst in Oregon Public Utility Commission.
Thanks, Abe. Pam.
Pam Archer, Regulatory Analyst, Cascade.
Thanks, Pam. JP.
Everyone, this is JP Botman with Oregon PUC staff. Thanks.
Thanks, JP. Yep, thank you. Kathleen.
Oh, hey there, Kathleen Campbell with Engineering Services. I'm a senior engineer.
Thanks, Kathleen. Monica.
Good afternoon, Monica Kaushal, Conservation Energy Efficiency for Cascade.
Thanks, Monica. Ashton.
Hey everybody, Ashton Michael Davis, economist with Cascade.
Ashton. Kathy.
Did you say Kathy?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Sorry, you're coming off soft. I'm Kathy Moyd. I'm monitoring for the League of Women Voters, but I participated in these meetings as an individual.
Thank you. Devin.
Sorry about that. Couldn't find my unmute. Good afternoon, everybody. Devin McReel, Senior Resource Planning Economist with Cascade.
Thanks, Devin. Mike.
Mike Parvinen with Regulatory Affairs, Cascade.
Caleb.
Yeah, Caleb Reimer, Economic Analyst with Cascade.
Thanks, Caleb. Mark. Mark, you muted yourself after you unmuted.
It's been one of those days. Good afternoon, everyone. Mark Sellers-Vaughn, Manager Supply Resource Planning with Cascade.
Thanks, Mark. Carolyn.
Carolyn Stone, Gas Supply Analyst with Cascade Natural Gas.
Thanks, Carolyn. And Eric Wood.
Yeah, good afternoon. This is Eric Wood, Gas Supply Supervisor with Cascade.
Thanks, Eric. I think that is everyone on the call for now. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to interrupt us. If you want to wait until a break point, that works as well. And you can also put questions in the chat. We have plenty of people on that will monitor the chat, and we'll try to get to your questions as soon as we can. Can everyone see the presentation fine?
I can see it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I see it.
Actually, let me put it in slideshow mode first, actually. All right, so gonna jump to the agenda. If it'll let me. So we just did introductions. I'll do a quick safety moment, and then we also want to touch on the stakeholder engagement document that we have provided to all of our stakeholders and we have out on our websites. We just want to put a slide together for that in each tag meeting. And then we'll have an overview of our gas supply, and Eric Wood will be presenting that. And then I'll be presenting on our Plexos optimization modeling and give kind of a basic understanding of our Plexus model. Feel free to ask questions during that presentation. We'll talk about plan scenarios and sensitivities. Then we'll discuss some alternative resources. We'll share our price forecast result that we're using for this IRP, the avoided cost methodology and any changes that we've made to it. And then we'll wrap it up with the remaining timeline for the IRP process and next steps. So are there any questions before we get going?
Are you going to post these on the website?
Yes, these will be posted on the website. I believe we have our Washington presentation posted. It takes a little bit of time to get things posted out on the website. We have to go through our internal IT department. We have people dedicated to updating websites. So we depend a little bit on their workload, but we try to get these posted as soon as we can.
Are the slides for Washington and Oregon basically the same, or are they tailored for the?
So for this IRP, they are very similar. There are some tweaks to it, but so I think one of them, we have a link to our IRP website. And in the Washington version, it's a link to the Washington website, and the Oregon version, it's a link to the Oregon one. There may be some other changes, but it's very similar.
Okay, thank you.
We have a question in chat. Brian, Abe asked if the slides have changed since you posted them on July 14th, because it's easier to look at his slide deck rather than the shared screen.
Gotcha. Yes. So the only changes I made between then and now is I updated the link because I realized it was still linked to the Washington one, and I updated the date on the title slide to the 28th instead of the 14th. And then I believe everything else is the same. If I remember anything that I updated between then and now, I'll point it out when we get to that slide. But it should be very similar. The main reason why we broke out tag 3 between Oregon and Washington is because originally we were going to have distribution system planning as part of it, and we wanted to kind of break that up by state. Just because the distribution system plans are kind of on a state by, they're different for each state. But since that was moved to tag 4, the presentation is very similar for both. So I'm going to jump into the quick safety moment. This is very relevant for the Tri-Cities, especially today and throughout this weekend. It's supposed to be above 110 degrees here. Please stay inside if you can. Stay hydrated. So this is drink plenty of fluids. Drink at least 15 ounces before starting working outside, and then 5 to 7 ounces more every 15 to 20 minutes. So make sure you hydrate before you go outside. Don't wait until you're outside. Try to avoid dehydrating liquids, so alcohol, coffee, tea, caffeinated beverages if you can. Wear protective clothing, so clothing that is lightweight, light colored, and loose fitting to help protect against the heat. Pace yourself. So if you're working outside or if you're playing outside, make sure you pace yourself and understand what your limits and abilities are outside. Make sure you schedule frequent breaks. Go rest inside and with air conditioning or in some shade. Avoid getting sunburnt, so wear sunscreen or a hat. I'm going to skip this next one. Avoid direct sunlight if you can, so find some shade, and then make sure you eat smaller meals. Don't fill up your stomach before you head outside. And then this one's really important. Be alert to signs of heat-related illness. So first, you'll feel some heat cramps. You'll get some pain in the legs, arms, abdomen. If you feel that, make sure you go somewhere where it's cool. Get some water. I wouldn't recommend chugging the water, but slowly drink the water. Heat exhaustion will set in if you don't do something. Excessive sweating, weakness, tiredness, clammy skin, muscle cramps, dizziness. And then if it gets really bad, you'll have a heat stroke. You'll stop sweating. You'll have a really high body temperature, rapid pulse, chills, slurred speech. Something else to keep in mind is look out for others. Someone may not realize they're having a heat stroke. they just may lose that cognitive ability. And so keep an eye on each other when you're out in the sun, and make sure to keep an eye on yourself too. So stakeholder engagement, I touched on this earlier. This is our document that we provided to all our stakeholders. It kind of sets out some of our commitments as well as requests from stakeholders throughout the IRP process. We really tried to allow for open, inclusive, and balanced participation. We recognize that some parties may not have the industry knowledge or the resources to devote to analyzing all aspects of the IRP. So we understand that there may be certain areas that you're focused on. And then we also understand tag members can and should speak up if they need more information. So feel free to reach out during the meeting, after the meeting. If you have any questions, let us know. Requests to stakeholders. We do ask that you ask questions. If you have any, don't be afraid to ask. You can even send an email to us if you don't want to ask in the larger group. Recognize relative informality of the meetings and ability to interject for clarification. And then when possible, please provide feedback to meeting materials in advance of the meeting. That way it gives us time to prepare a response that we can give during the meeting. If there are any questions or thoughts that you have prior to the meeting. With that said, I'm going to kick it over to Eric to talk about our gas supply overview.
Hey, thanks, Brian. Good afternoon, all. So I'll go over our gas supply overview, look at our resources in terms of what we have available, how we kind of allocate and use those resources. And so every year we lay out our portfolio plan, and this is a look at our portfolio procurement design, and it changes slightly every year. We look at the percentages every year. It's a declining percentage for a 3-year portfolio out. And so in year 1, we try to acquire approximately 80% of our annual requirements. In year 2, it's 60%. And then in year 3, it's 25%. And that 80% in year 1 just allows us more flexibility to use our storage allocation. And then it also allows us more flexibility in the market. And I found that, at times it does come into play when there's warmer months in the winter. So, months can vary. And so if it's very warm, then we just don't use as much supply. So that's always a factor. And then the up and down balance in terms of our pipeline balances and our position daily kind of accounts for that as well. So it's always good to have that flexibility in the winter. So our hedge percentages, this year we changed to a 50% hedge in the first year, a 40% hedge in the second year, and a 25% hedge in the second year. And those are either fixed price physicals or financials. And so every year we review that through our gas supply oversight committee, and we can make changes as necessary. And we did this year a little bit. We reduced our year 1 and then actually increased our year 3 hedge percentage a bit. And then all this is based on our annual load expectation of 35 million decatherms, which is kind of consistent in recent history. I think I just looked at last year and it was right at 35 and some odd change. So right there still in that 35 million decatherms annually. Go to the next one. This is a look at our transportation on our pipelines. And so Cascade holds transportation on 6 pipelines. And some of those are just purely upstream pipelines. So we hold transport on Enbridge, Williams, GTN, Nova, Foothills, and Ruby. And so the in delivery on those pipelines are from actually Enbridge, Williams, and GTN. And so our system is arranged across those 3 different in delivery systems. And so our portfolio is arranged around that available transport and the system demands. And so each month, each year, we calculate and figure out the demands for the entire system, and then arrange that supply accordingly across those 3 different pipelines. Excuse me. And so this is a look at our pipeline transport flow. And a lot of our transport comes from the Sumas Hunt area. That's kind of the bigger portion that we have, and it flows south and then east across Northwest Pipe to part of our system in Central Washington. And then we do have some in Western Washington as well. And then for the Central Oregon part, which is a big part of our usage for Oregon, we flow mostly from the ACO region, and it flows down across the 2 upstream pipelines onto GTN and flows down into Central Oregon. And then for Oregon specifically too, in the winter, we use gas from Opal, and then that gas is flowed across Ruby. And then we transport that off of Ruby onto GTN to flow north. And so we use our resources in different ways in different regions of the system. And so that's kind of the Oregon piece is more provided from the Opal region across Ruby, and then from the ACO region, even though we still have the option to transfer gas off of Northwest Pipe at Stanfield and flow it south onto GTN as well. So there's an interconnect there in Eastern Oregon. So just different ways that we can flow gas across our system. And then there's a look at kind of the different storage fields there. There's JP in Western Washington, Mist in Oregon. And then we do have some at Plymouth, which is in southwestern Washington, and that's liquefied natural gas. Next. So this is just a good look at our winter usage in terms of how the allocation is across the 3 pipelines. And the top pipeline there is Northwest Pipe, and you can see that the vast majority of usage is off of Northwest Pipe. And then secondly is GTN in Central Oregon. And then the last little bit is Enbridge. And what that Enbridge is referring to is that we have a direct connect with Enbridge that reaches across the border. And it's a small part of our system up in the northwestern corner of Washington. And so it's pretty consistent in terms of the weather in that region, so you don't get as many spikes. And then, but obviously when you look at Northwest Pipe, there's a lot of different spikes in the region because it's across the region too. It's Western Washington and clear over into Eastern Oregon. And so you can have kind of quite a bit of weather fluctuation in those regions. Then this is just a good look at our transport summary. And so the reason I throw this in is just to give you a view of where our transport comes as far as the amounts and the percentages. So the vast majority, like I mentioned, is from Sumas South or Huntington South on Northwest Pipe, and that makes up about 45%. And then we do have the Rockies North, and so we do supply our system from both regions on Northwest Pipe, from the south and the north. Then we have a little bit on Station 2. We have some that's a little bit different from Kingsgate South, that it makes up part of it. And then the ACO region, which is the Nova and Foothills Pipeline North, that makes up some of the portion that we transport down into Central Oregon. And then there's a little bit on Ruby over the winter.
Do you have a breakdown of the transport within each state, or would that be too difficult?
So there is no breakdown of transport within each state by the way the transport works. It doesn't really work on a state to state level. It works more of a system level.
Yeah, my concern is the climate protection program that apparently requires you to regulate the transport within Oregon.
Yeah, and there's no way to do that on the pipeline. So I don't know how that's going to coincide with that.
I noticed GTN isn't on this. GTN doesn't carry any transport.
So it's just labeled differently here. So
okay.
it's labeled. Yeah, it's labeled as Kingsgate, meaning that's the market point south. And so that's it. It looks a little funny here, but it's just labeled a little bit differently.
Yeah, I would like to let you know I have on a couple of occasions suggested that requiring you to regulate the transport does not make sense.
Next. And then this is a look at our supply kind of by the same summary location. And so this kind of also gives you an idea of how we utilize our transport, in that, you know, there is a vast majority that comes from Hunt South, Hunt or Sumas South. And so that is the Northwest Pipeline South flow. And then you can see we have some on Station 2. And then Rocky Mountain Pool, Wyoming Pool, and Opal, that's all of the Northwest Pipe North flow that we get. And then the ACO region is where we would get our gas supply that then ultimately flows onto GTN. So it kind of lines up with our transport, not exactly, of course, but it's very close. Then this is a look at our storage resources. So we utilize our storage as much as we can in the winter. And we have Jackson Prairie, Plymouth, and Mist. Jackson Prairie, like I mentioned, is in Western Washington. We have 4 accounts there of about 1.2 BCF and 56,366 decatherms of withdrawal rights. And so typically we definitely have a goal to cycle our storage as much as we can. We cycled about 99.48% of Jackson Prairie over the last winter. And so we always look at pricing and other market conditions, but typically we try to meet those cycling kind of targets. For Plymouth is LNG, so we don't have a goal of cycling it. We typically just try to use it for peak demand. And so oftentimes we don't cycle all of it, but it does provide us a lot of capacity in terms of demand capacity. So we have 78,000 decatherms of demand. So on those peak days, that's when Plymouth really kicks in, because we can withdraw 78,000 a day out of Plymouth. And then in Mist, another valuable resource that we added in 2019, and then we added additional capacity of demand in the fall of 2021. And then with that demand and capacity, it really helps our system operation. And we have about 1.6 BCF of capacity and 50,000 decatherms of demand out of Mist. And once again, we try to target cycling Mist. I can't remember what the exact percentage of Mist that we used this last year, but it's usually in that about 95% range. So at 100% demand, Cascade can meet about 67% of peak day needs. And then the total capacity for storage is about 15% of winter demand. And winter demand actually makes up about 68% of our overall annual demand. So you can kind of see storage is a valuable asset to have in the winter, just given the amount of demand that we have over the winter. This is just a quick look of how we utilized Jackson Prairie this last year, and this would be for 2021. And this storage map runs from April 1st to March 31st. So we start filling up April 1st and then fill until the end of October. And then withdraw out until the end of March. That's typical. Sometimes there's some overlapping months, but typically this is what we target for. There's a target put in there, and then the yellow line is just what we did last year. And so we just try to kind of stay within those targets. We look at pricing daily. We look at pricing monthly. We look at our storage utilization monthly to determine how much storage we can withdraw in order or put in, and to try to meet those requirements for the system. And this is a look at our Mist storage for 21-22. This curve does look a little odd. The reason is that in the fall of 2021 is when we added the additional storage. So that's why the target all of a sudden jumped up in this storage curve. it'll look a little bit different for next year, but same concept here where we're trying to utilize our storage to the best of our ability over the winter. And this is Plymouth. Like I said, Plymouth is typically just used for peak demand. And so the yellow line, once again, is where we were at for the winter of 2021. We had some late weather that came in, I think, March timeframe this last year. And sometimes when that happens, our demand is lower from the ratchets on mist, for example. The mist ratchets to drop off once you utilize most of the storage, and so you just don't have the demand available. And so that's part of the reason why you see in March sometimes that we can end up using Plymouth LNG if we have these really cold systems that came in. And I remember this last March, it was pretty cold during that time frame. So and then next. Looks like we had a question there. Go ahead.
Hi, Eric. Yeah, this is JP with PUC staff. I'm just wondering about the storage used on an annual basis, and is it to support just the retail sales, or retail sales and the transportation sales going through the system?
So I will say that yes, it's designed for our core sales, our retail sales. Yes. There are times when we do have to support the system as a whole. And so it's not that it's used for the transport segment specifically, it's really used for a core segment specifically. However, as a system operator, though, we still have to keep up and keep within our tolerances. So either we have to use resources to do that or storage to do that. I'd say it's not very typical that we have to do that, but there are points in time when we have to support the system regardless. And if that means if our transport segment is really using resources that maybe they're shorting the system, then we have to add resources somehow to the system. It does happen. Yes, but we always try to communicate with the transport segment and make sure that they're in line and make sure that they're kind of meeting the goals and targets that they need to meet as well. Just like Northwest Pipe will come to us and say, you guys are shorting the system too much and you need to add more supply on. So it's a trickle down effect, definitely, where Northwest Pipe comes to us and we go to our customers. So everybody has to work together in order to meet the entire needs of the system.
Right, and this is Chris with the gas supply department. Just to add a little bit more color to what Eric just said, the only time that it would actually benefit transport group is we would utilize storage just because, like Eric said, to maintain the system. And at that time, we wouldn't know specifically who was causing, whether it be the retail side or the transport group. So we're going to maintain the system to make sure there's system integrity, and that may sometimes help the transport group, but we also have tools in place like entitlement penalties and all that to ensure that the transport group does follow the rules and stay in balance on any given day. But yeah, the reasoning being we don't know because of any given time, because we don't know what that transport group is taking at that exact point in time we're trying to maintain the system. So sometimes it does benefit the transport group, but it's kind of an unintentional result is all.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense. Or I just complicated it, I don't know, but
it's kind of day after effect too. So, we aren't able to reconcile all of what everybody used until the following day. And then by that time, you've already allocated resources for the next day. So it's kind of a backward look sometimes.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just curious. I know transport makes up a really large percent of the therms going through.
Yeah. For Cascade, it's huge. And especially in Central Oregon too, on GTN. I mean, we may only have 5,000 or 6,000 decatherms of usage a day, but there are some power gens on our system that can, more than quadruple that in a day. So Cascade system, I would say, is definitely probably one of the most difficult systems, just from looking at the other utilities in terms of the amount of industrial and transport customers that we have can really overwhelm our system if everybody doesn't kind of play by the rules.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
So this is a look at our hedge calculation table, and kind of like I mentioned in the first slide, we take a look at this annually and every year. And so, like I'd mentioned before, we contract 80% of our base supply in year 1, 60 in year 2, 25 in year 3. And then within that base supply too, we target for a certain amount of hedges too. So 50, 40, and 25 currently. And so we look at our forecasted annual amount, the needed supply that we have, our hedge target, and then so we work our portfolio to achieve these targets within this table in order to meet our system demands over the year. Next. So this is just a quick overview of our total suppliers. And so there's about 16 different suppliers currently that we have in our portfolio. We do have over 25 active NASBs that we send out RFPs to monthly for forward curve stuff, forward supply. But it seems there's always like a group of about 16 that are active. So depending upon the marketer, some can be more active over a couple of years and some can be less. So it just kind of fluctuates up and down per supplier. But we have a pretty diverse portfolio supply of suppliers in our system. Next. So just a quick thing on renewable natural gas. It is something that we're looking at constantly in our portfolio. We were the successful bidder, in Deschutes County landfill RFP. And so that's at Knott Hill and Bend. And, the plan is to use that natural gas that comes off that landfill, convert it, clean it to pipeline quality so we can inject it into our system. The business development team really is looking at all these opportunities. Gas supply is involved in that. Yes, it does affect our system when those get injected. And so we do stay involved, but it's more around the business development that is really out and actively seeking all those renewable opportunities. And so I think there will be more information provided in Tag 4 when it comes to that. Next. This is just a quick look at our winter supply stack to kind of just a different view of it. The bottom kind of layer there is kind of what we'd have in current supply over the winter of 22 to 23. And then the RFPs that we need to add on. And so we're constantly adding new supply all the time. So we start in April and then we kind of end in November in terms of trying to get our winter supply. But then the next portfolio year rolls through April. And then we always look at front of the month purchases if we need to. And then kind of our planned storage supply stack on there as well. So it gives you an idea of just the layers of what we add on. And then the next one. And then this is just an example of kind of what we may do during a peak day example. I think we plan for about 275,000 decatherms in a peak day. So just kind of look at the different stack that we have there. So the current supply, our added RFP over the procurement season, and then we look at front of the month all the time to add. And so that typically can be about 20,000 decatherms in the winter. And then our JP storage, our mist storage, we can look at daily spot gas as well. I had 20,000 in there of daily spot gas, but we can definitely go up to 40, 60,000 a day if we had to. And then our Plymouth LS storage of 78,125. Just in this stack, it puts us about 353, 491. That's just an example, though, that to show you that we do have the resources available to meet those peak days. Obviously, this is just one peak day. And so the allocation gets different if there's multiple peak days in a row. But it just gives you an example that we do have the resources in order to meet that peak day demand. I think that was the last one, Brian, wasn't it? Yeah, that was the last one. So is there any other questions that anyone might have?
I would kind of like to ask one of, and I apologize for probably not having done my homework enough, but the process of going from landfill gas to usable gas, can you explain what that process is? And in particular, does it generate any greenhouse gases? I realize
well,
that the climate protection program doesn't
Yeah.
Doesn't hit you up for that, but those of us who are worried about all of the emissions in Oregon are curious. And I just recently became aware of that you can't just go straight from the landfill to the pipeline.
No, and I'm not the engineer in the group. My basic understanding is yes, we do always have to clean that through a gas chromatograph, clean and process that gas. I think maybe engineering or others could speak more about the process of how that's done.
This is Chris again. I can say in specific for that Bend landfill, we have hired folks to help us with that process because we're not experts in that cleaning process. It's not what we do. So they're the ones that are kind of tasked with gathering the gas and cleaning it to inject it. We're just partnering with them. So definitely not our wheelhouse of cleaning the gas.
It's a big scrubber.
This is Mark. We'll make sure that that gets addressed in tag 4.
Yeah, I mean, one reason I'm asking is because I was monitoring the air quality permit for the renewable diesel that was going to go in Clatskanai, and they were proposing to put out about 1 million greenhouse gas equivalents in order to do their purification. So that's what kind of tipped me off that this may not be a negligible issue.
Yeah, and this is Kathleen with engineering. I think with any project, you have to set your goals. So I think it just depends on how those goals are set up or those benchmarks. Typically, the more contained something is, the more cost it's just justifying it. From a design perspective, I think that's how that goes.
Yeah, you were kind of coming in and out. I had a little trouble understanding that.
Oh, sorry about that. Is this any better?
Thank you. I realize this is kind of off topic, so I'm just taking a chance to assuage my curiosity.
Yeah, we'll try and expand on that in tag 4. I see that Abe has a question. Yes, what determines these? I'm guessing it's the allocation to the peak day stack.
Yes, correct. Just a question to Eric. Is there an optimization program depending on price? We're talking about spot daily price and all this. What determines? Is it something on a daily basis that you run, or?
No, so we definitely have. We just look at it daily in terms of what we have available. So day to day, it just can vary. Obviously, the RFP is already done during the winter, so we know what that's going to be. The front of the month spot gas is dependent upon storage, how much storage allocation we have left. It's also depending upon maybe weather. If we see like a warm weather period coming in, which we can only see out a couple of weeks. It's also dependent upon the pack or draft that we have or our position on the pipeline. So there's a lot of things that really go into it. And it's just looking at all those things and pricing too. I know, we look at pricing every month to determine, if it's viable or if we can use more storage versus maybe purchasing more gas on the market. And so even though it's not done on an optimization model, it's something that we look at monthly and daily too.
Thank you.
JP, do you have a question?
Yeah, I don't want to derail this. I just had I'm two questions. One, a little fuzzy. The difference between capacity and withdrawal rights, to be specific, what is just if you could real briefly. I know I should know this,
Oh.
but it kind of lost on me sometimes.
Yeah. So when I was referring to capacity, that's how much we actually have in the tank, so to speak.
Yeah.
So 1 million in the tank is capacity. And then demand, when I speak of demand, is how much we can actually pull out of the tank in a day.
On a daily basis.
On a daily basis, yeah.
Right. I just wanted to make sure. And then, is there anything? I don't know if this would be for maybe for Brian or someone else. Is there anything that can be shared yet about the timing or the size of the Deschutes landfill resource?
I wish we had. I don't see Shander Kent on the phone, so I'm not sure if I don't know if anyone else has that information. I don't have that information myself.
That's fine. I mean, I think it's going to figure in the in you guys' reply comments. I just thought maybe if you knew something off the kind of broadly off the top of your head, just get a sense of how big it is. When it'll show up. Thanks. That's it.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to jump into some Plexos optimization modeling. Feel free to stop me if you have any questions. This is a new model, as everyone may be aware. We used to use an optimization model called SendOut. SendOut was a pretty old model. It hadn't seen updates in quite a while. It didn't have the capability to put constraints in for emissions. And that was a big issue for us when we started looking at the Climate Protection Program and the Climate Commitment Act in Washington. We definitely wanted to make sure that our all-encompassing model that takes all the resources could also factor in emission constraints. So what is Plexos? It is an optimization model for our upstream resources. This model permits the company to develop and analyze a variety of resource portfolios to help determine the type, size, and timing of resources. It is a very powerful and complex tool. It operates by combining a series of existing and potential demand side and supply side resources and optimizes all of that while utilizing the lowest net present cost over the entire planning period for a given demand and emission constraints. This next sentence, I stole it off of Plexos's website. If you want to go check out Plexos's website, it's Energy Exemplar. They also have an electric optimization model. So there's a lot of familiarity with Energy Exemplar in the Pacific Northwest, especially with electric and now natural gas companies. It's also important to recognize that Plexos provides helpful but not perfect information to guide decisions. So what are some of the modeling challenges? Well, one of them is supply needs to get gas to the city gate. And it sounds kind of funny, but we spend many hours in Plexos tweaking it, making sure we have all the transportation set up, make sure that supply is accurately representing what we actually see with supply. We have to input storage and make sure it's connected correctly. We have to tie everything to city gate zones or the city gate itself on GTN. So it's very tricky. There's a lot of hours and details that go into modeling Plexos. Some of the transport agreements were entered into decades ago, so there's a little bit of a discrepancy between when you saw that map, there was more GTN than there was foothills, and there's more foothills than there is NGTL. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We've tried to align those a little better with some acquisitions from previous IRPs. Some of receipt quantity and aggregated delivery quantity can help identify resource efficiency, depending on how rights are allocated. The aggregated look can mask individual city gate issues, and the disaggregated look can create deficiencies where they don't exist. So for example, we have a very wide service territory, and we can transport gas in we're very flexible with how we can transport gas. And so there could be possibility where we see a shortfall somewhere, say Central Washington, where if we picked up a transport agreement that doesn't make it to Central Washington, it could free up some of our transport contracts that could go to multiple locations. So we have to take a very aggregated look at this when we're doing the modeling, and we have to keep all areas in mind when we're thinking about alternative resources. In many cases, operational capacity is greater than contracted. Supply, storage, and upstream transportation focuses on the core. So this is one reason why I like Eric going before my presentation. Is you can see that there's some differences between operations and modeling. So in our modeling, we try to keep the non-core out of the storage and the transportation because we don't do the purchasing and the storing, any of the upstream stuff for the transport customers. So for our modeling purposes on upstream transport and storage, it's for the core. And so in the IRP modeling, only the core has the ability to use storage and upstream transportation. But we do include the non-core because we are in charge of some of their emissions. And so we have to consider them in our modeling. And then Plexos has perfect knowledge is something to keep in mind while we talk about Plexos. And an example of that would be, and I know Sendout was a little bit worse than Plexos in this, where it would, because we put a price forecast in storage in Plexos in Sendout, and I know Sendout had a really bad habit of looking out and seeing if gas prices were cheaper next year, and then it would decide what to do with storage. I know Plexos has looked at, Energy Exemplars looked at fixing that for the Plexos system, and so they've kind of cleaned that up a little bit. So here's some of the inputs I'm going to discuss today: demand, supply, price forecast, storage, transportation, constraints, and emissions. And I'm just going to give a little bit of an example and just touch on each of these and how we put them into Plexos. Actually, before I move on, off to this right, this is a screenshot of Plexos, and you can see this is our current system. You can see we have emissions, and if I clicked on this down, I can't do it on a screenshot, but in Sendout, if I clicked on it, you would see Washington CO2 emissions, and you'd see Oregon CO2 emissions. We would have all of our pipeline transport under gas pipelines. Nodes, these are kind of areas where you connect transport or you connect a storage to it and then a transport out of it. You have storages, demand, DSM programs, gas contracts, that's your supply. And then I'll talk a little bit about constraints and data files, variable scenarios. So demand behind the gate, just a reminder from Tag 2, Cascade has strived over the last several years to enhance the IRP forecast. Many years ago, we used to forecast, I believe, at the district level, and we tried to get a little more granular at the city gate level. We have to keep in mind that billing data is not the best use of analyzing data because it comes in as on billing timelines. So we try to use we do use our pipeline data, and we match it up with our billing data to try and get an allocation for our usage. to make sure we have the customers and we know what their daily usage is. Some towns can be served by multiple pipelines and the mix can change over time. And then if you want more information on the demand forecasts, I would recommend looking at tag 2. There's the presentations out there, the videos out there. Great presentation on demand forecasts in tag 2. So demand is forecasted at the city gate level by rate schedule. For Northwest Pipeline, so the city gates that come off of Northwest Pipeline, we combine those into one, and they're associated with the pipeline zone, which I'll discuss later. But for GTN, that's more of a demand tap, so we keep those city gates separated. Demand input, it is a daily amount. We put projections in out to 2050 for CPP planning and CCA planning. We also include climate change impacts to our demand forecast. So that's something that we also mentioned in tag 2. For the base case, we want to look at what our current demand is, what our current supply, our current transport. So we run a base case without any DSM at first to kind of show us what the world would look like without any DSM. And then we, once we do our avoided cost model and we run it through ETO for Oregon, we include DSM in our model, and it is it's now in Plexos, it's now included as a decrement to demand, whereas in send out, we had to put it in as a free supply, which is essentially the same thing, but Plexos has given us the ability to put it in as a decrement. So here's just a fun little picture to break up the presentation a little bit and to show the difference between send out and Plexos. And this is what demand looks like in send out. This is what we called an interconnect in send out. Now we call them nodes, just different terminology. And one thing that we determined is that it was easier to combine these into one. It makes the runs a lot quicker because it's not trying to make decisions based on individual locations and rate schedules. But the demand forecast is done at the city gate and rate schedule level and rolled up. So here's another example. This is what it looks like in send out when we're setting it up. You can see that zone 11, it's tied to zone 11's DSM. Demand type, it's an input. So demand, you see data file. This is a data file is a CSV that we connect to Plexos, and we can go into the CSV and update that. So say that we have an updated demand forecast, or we want to run a different forecast, we can create a different data file, and then we can create a scenario. We can do low growth or no growth after 2030, something that we did in UM 2178. We can plug that into here, and we can rerun the optimization model off of a new demand. Shortage price, so we make sure that if we are short, we put a cost to it. That way, it forces us to serve until there's a hard constraint, such as emissions or not enough transport. And then excess price. If there's a constraint that makes it so we oversupply at the demand, it'll charge us some money to do that. But we've made this big enough where it won't overserve, basically, for our modeling purposes. So those are the main inputs for demand. So to go back and touch on supply a little bit, Eric walked through this. I did want to mention one additional thing is that this is our current system, but in 2023, based on results from our 2018 IRP and our 2020 IRP, we determined that we need more transportation to serve our Oregon service territory. So we picked up 20,000 on NGTL. So this is in November, I want to say, of 2023. This will be 41,000. Foothills will be 42,000, and then GTN north to south will be 89,000. So 20 on NGTL, 20 on GTN, and 10 on Foothills will also be added. So Cascade can purchase gas at 4 markets: ACO, Sumas, Kingsgate, and the Opal Rockies area. At each market, Cascade can purchase gas at different locations, like Eric had mentioned. For the first year, we try to use all of our current contracts that we have completed. And then after that, since we don't have 28-year-long supply contracts, we kind of have to put in some simulated or fake contracts, basically. But we try to do it as best to match like how we would actually contract gas. And over the planning horizon, the contracts are renewed in November and April for modeling purposes. And again, you can see a picture: ACO receipt gets gas at ACO. You can see it up here. ACO receipt, there's a supply tied to it, and then you can transport it down to ABC. That's the Alberta, British Columbia border. So supply base and fixed. So supply base and fixed are the baseline supply contracts that are entered into every 12 months. So a base contract has a basis rate. This is defined as the price of gas from our price forecast. And then a fixed contract has a fixed rate. And then a penalty is applied to each contract if you don't take gas. And this is just an effort. It's a modeling quirk to make sure that you don't take more gas than you actually need. That way we can get that base supply gas. And I'll show an image in a couple slides to kind of show what I mean by that. So you can see here, this is what we see in send out. Sorry. You can see the gas node it's connected to is ACO receipt. Contract type is base. Quantity day, supply MDQ, it's a data file. So that's how much we can purchase on any given day. The price isn't actually zero, it's tied to ACO, the ACO basin. And then you can see we renominate, or we tell it to, in the old send out terms, it was called RMix, resource mix. So we basically tell it to make a decision, optimize on November 11th, the first day of November, sorry, not November 11th, first day of November, to determine how much base gas it'll need for the year. I see we have a question. What's driving the need for additional capacity in Oregon? So in the 2018 IRP and 2020 IRP, it was basically growth. There's a lot of growth in Central Oregon, especially in that Bend area. I think in the demand forecast, I want to say we had Bend growing at about 2.5%, 3%, but there's a lot of growth going on in GTN. And when we modeled in our 2018 IRP and our 2020 IRP, we had shortfalls when trying to serve customers in Oregon. And so we went out and worked with GTN to make sure we can pick up capacity. Another driving need for it is we have a discrepancy between NGTL, Foothills, and GTN on our transportation. And so we wanted to try to better align that to make sure that we had the transport and we can get it from ACO down to Central Oregon. So here's what the base supply looks like. And we see that demand, and this is just a fake demand example. I put expected load, and then I put a peak incident in, I think, December. But all this is not actually how load would look. It would be a lot more jagged. The peak day probably wouldn't be as extreme. It would probably lead up more and then come down a little slower. But anyway, the purpose of this is just to show that base supply, the purpose of it is to purchase the least amount of gas on a day. That way we're not paying penalties when we can't take the gas. Winter base supply. So this is basically the same thing as base supply, but it's in the winter months, November to March, the end of March. And so the maximum daily quantity is again set by Plexos. We tell it to RMix or renominate the supply, and it'll take the base amount, the least amount, without taking a penalty in the winter month. So you can see that orange line. And then we jump into some day gas. So we have day supply winter. And this is renominated at the beginning of November each year. It takes into account the fixed and variable costs of resources to determine the proper amount to take. It has an MDQ cap, but it is not a must-take supply. So it'll decide on each day how much it needs. And we do cap that winter day supply. So for example, if it's at 10,000, it can take anywhere from 0 to 10,000 on any given day that it wants. So that's kind of our day gas that we go out and purchase, or Eric would go out and purchase. It has a slightly higher premium just because it is a day supply. So you can see the yellow dotted lines. It covers the non-peak events. It covers that supply that the base doesn't cover. Similar with day supply summer, renominated at the beginning of April, has an MDQ, but it is not it is not a must-take supply. And again, it has a slightly higher cost than base supply. And the reason why we do that is, one, because usually day gas is a little more expensive, but also if we made it cheaper than the base gas, it would just take all day gas and it wouldn't take any base gas, which is not really how we would do it operationally. So we did make it slightly higher. So you can see summer day, the red dotted lines, and you can see it's capped. Again, that's to also put in peak day supply. So we have a peak supply. This is where we go out again. It's like the day gas. It's at a premium. As you can imagine, supply on a peak day, which is a very cold day, gas prices will be pretty high. So we put a premium on that. And you can see the blue dotted lines. And you can see that it can be purchased in the winter, but it can also be purchased in the summer months. These edge ones are called shoulder months, where they meet with the winter months. We may need some peak supply when it comes to summer usage. And then storage. So Eric touched on this a little bit. We have Jackson Prairie, Plymouth, and Mist. We have 4 storage contracts with JP, 2 with Plymouth, and 2 with Mist, which it'll be combined into 1 contract in 2024. We have storage injection targets for JP that are set at 35% by end of June, 80% by the end of August, and 100% by the end of September. So that's what we want to make sure the minimum is at each of those months to make sure we're filled up by the time the winter rolls around. Cascade can withdraw approximately 56,000 decatherms from JP, 78,000 from Plymouth, and 50,000 per day from Mist, for a total of 184,000. Approximately. And this is what it looks like in send out in Plexos. You can see it's very similar. You have transport in, you have transport out, and then you have your 4 contracts where it can inject, it can withdraw. And the Plexos does the optimization on that. So here's an example, max volume, 100,000. Some of this information is confidential, so I blacked it out. But you can see we have withdrawal charge, injection charge, reservation volumes, max withdrawal day, max injection day. We would have ratchets. I believe we had those on Mist and Plymouth, or sorry, JP. And just to explain the injection ratchets a little more, let's say that when we're down to 50% capacity, there may be a limit on how much we can withdraw in the day. So that's something that we also include in here. That way we can model storage like it's done operational. So there are some similarities with operations, but there also are some differences. So now on to transportation. This is the means of how Cascade can get gas from the supplier to the end user. We have multiple types of transportation. We have a single delivery point, which would be, for example, let's say Sumis is the receipt and delivery is Bellingham. So we would pick up the gas in Sumis, we purchase it from there, and we would deliver it to Bellingham. We also have multiple delivery points. So let's say that the receipt is still Sumis, but our delivery point is Central Washington. We could drop the gas off in Bellingham. We could drop it off in Longview, Kelso area. Once we cross the gorge, we could drop it off in Umatilla. So we have options with these flexible transport contracts. The multiple delivery point contracts gives Cascade the flexibility to move gas to where it's most needed. Northwest Pipe transportation goes to the zonal level because MDDOs can be reallocated, and then GTN stays at the city level. So to talk about the details of transportation real quick, it has an MDQ, a maximum daily quantity, a D1 rate, a transportation rate, and a fuel loss percentage. The MDQ is a maximum amount of gas Cascade can move on any given day on the pipeline. The D1 rate is like a reservation rate. It's basically like paying rent on the pipeline. So if we have 10,000 decatherms a day, we have to pay that every day, regardless of what flows on it. The transportation rate is what you pay when you do flow gas. So say you have 10,000 MDQ, but you flow 5,000, you pay a D1 rate on the 10,000 decatherms, but you only pay transportation rate on the 5,000 decatherms. And then we have a fuel loss percentage. That's statutory percentage of gas based on the tariffs from the pipelines. So that we include in our modeling, and it accounts for the loss and unaccounted for gas from the point of where the gas was purchased to the city. So here's a transport example. The nodes in send out are these big yellow things, and you can see the arrow pointing in Plexos. We have the nodes, these blue nodes, and then you can tell which way the pipeline's flowing based on these arrows. So these are our 4 foothills contracts that are going from Alberta, British Columbia, point to our Kingsgate. So this is what it looks like in send out. You can see again, you can go to the visualizer and you can look at it and see it goes from ABC to Kingsgate, or you can just go into where you put all the information in and you can see gas node from ABC, gas node to Kingsgate. We have a max flow day. We have a flow charge. So there's a little bit of a change in terminology with Plexos. Flow charge is the transportation charge. And then we have the reservation charge, that D1 rate. reservation volume, and then the loss rate. That's that fuel loss I talked about. Delivery rights versus receipt rights. So Cascade has more delivery rights than receipt rights. As you can see, 457,000 decatherms delivery rights, but only 360,000 decatherms of receipt rights. So one way to think about it is we actually only have 360,000 delivery rights, but we can allocate those 457,000 different ways, basically. So we do have some flexibility with our receipt and delivery rights. To simplify modeling in Plexos, the software allows the user to group multiple paths of one contract into constraint groups. This tells Plexos to allow each path to take up to a certain amount of gas, but not to exceed that amount of gas for all the paths of the contract. So the analyst identifies which contracts should be in the group and assigns an MDQ for that constraint group. And I'll go through an example real quick. For those who aren't familiar with these types of contracts. So let's say we have a contract of 4,000 decatherms. It's a receipt of Sumis, and it can go to 3 different locations. So it can send all 4,000 to X1 on a certain day. The next day it can send 4,000 to X2, and then the following day it can send 4,000 to X3. The only thing is on a given day, the combination of all 3 cannot exceed 4,000. So you can't send 2,000, 2,000, and 2,000 on a given day. So if we didn't have this capability in Plexos, this is kind of what it would look like. We would have to send 2.5 MDTs to, we'd have to pick and choose which zones to go to. So it's really nice to have this flexibility in Plexos. So here you can see what a transport group looks like. The gas pipelines, this is all the gas pipelines in this group. So it's we have 3 in this one. So it can send X amount on each of these, but it cannot exceed whatever the constraint is on a given day for all 3 combined. Are there any questions on that? I know it's might be a little difficult to wrap your head around. So feel free to ask questions. Is Plexo, we have a question. Is Plexos permanently replacing send out or in addition to? So currently we still have send out and Plexos, but the goal is to permanently replace send out with Plexos. The purpose of getting Plexos was to replace send out. There's a lot of things we like with it, and it also has a lot of the same functionality. So once we are comfortable with Plexos and we feel good about the results and we think it's the model we're going to use going forward, then yeah, we'll eventually go away with send out.
This is Mark. It's important to also keep in mind that send out, the vendor for send out has not really supported that application for at least a decade, if not more. And as we all know, the world has changed, particularly in terms of climate change, emissions, and so forth. Plexos has full support, and it also has the enhanced capabilities that we need to meet some of the new modeling challenges. Washington and or.
Yeah. Smart, yeah. Right. So here's the map of pipeline zones. It's just a certain area, but you can kind of get an idea of what we're looking at when we talk about combining city gates into a pipeline zone. So you can see here from the Meacham station on Northwest Pipeline down into central Idaho, they have zone 24, which we have a couple of city gates along that path. We have Baker, Ontario. I think there's another one, I'm just blanking on it. So we combine all those into zone 24 for our Plexos model. Again, zone me, there's 5 or 6 city gates in this area. We actually had to break out Walla Walla into its zone me Washington. That way we can differentiate the emissions for Walla Walla and put those towards Washington rather than Oregon. But you can you can see zone 26 is this path across the gorge up a little bit into the Longview Kelso area. Then we have 30W, which is the Bremerton area, and zone 30. Sorry, that's zone 30S is the Bremerton area. Zone 30W is the Bellingham area. And then Central Washington, you have zone 11. That's up towards Wenatchee. Zone 10, this is the up towards Zilla, Toppenish area, and then you have zone 20, which goes up through the Tri-Cities into Othello, Washington, and Moses Lake. So that's kind of how we break it down in terms of Northwest Pipeline. And then you can see the line with GTN here. You have city gates along GTN, Bend, Prineville, Gilcrest, Kemmel, all those city gates in Central Oregon. So emissions, Cascade is modeling emissions as a constraint. So basically what this is saying is if you can't pick up enough RNG, hydrogen, carbon offsets, what it's going to do is it's not going to allow traditional supply to get to the customers, and it'll leave them unserved. So what it does is it makes sure that we have enough carbon emission reductions in our model to serve our customers. These emissions constraints are based on the Climate Protection Plan out of Oregon and the Climate Commitment Act out of Washington. So Plexos must balance traditional gas along with carbon offsets and renewable natural gas like RNG and hydrogen to meet demand while also hitting emission reduction targets. And we'll discuss these decarbonization planning a little bit further in tag 4. And then we'll have some results in tag 5 as well. So here's an example of what it looks like. So you tie these gas nodes to an emission, and you put, so like the non-core traditional gas Washington, we have to put a production rate. So if our non-core customers purchase natural gas from a traditional supply, it will be charged an emission. And so we can only allocate so many carbon emissions to a certain year based on the CPP and the CCA. And you can see here we have the Washington CO2 limit. So it's connected to a data file that tells it what its limit is on carbon emissions. Are there any questions?
Hey, Brian, this is JP. We can wait until the next tag, but just wondering, like, when you talk about emissions and what Plexos chooses from to solve for the emissions parameters, are there other possibilities on the list, like even more DSM in addition to RNG as something to select from, kind of like a capacity expansion module for Plexos when it's going through trying to make that determination?
Yeah, so we and I think we might talk about that a little more in our scenario modeling, but I believe we have calculated some avoided costs based on higher pricing to try and get a higher DSM amount. So we will have some scenarios with higher or more expected DSM that we can put in here. Yeah. So we'll have more DSM. We'll do scenarios around demand with with lower demand and how that'll impact the emissions. We will include RNG, hydrogen, but yeah, we'll definitely have some different DSM in there modeled.
Thanks.
Hey, Brian, just to add on to that also, because I've been kind of addressing your question, JP, in addition to RNG, although hydrogen pretty much is in the same boat, but it's another option that the optimizer has a tool to access, making that optimization decision, as well as the CCIs that are offered in Oregon and similar vehicles, the auction mechanism in Washington. The model also is allowed to choose from any or all of those resources in an integrated manner to select the optimal mix.
Thanks. So that helps. Appreciate it.
Yeah, this screenshot, yeah, it looks like I grabbed a bunch some of the Washington stuff, but yeah, it'll say Oregon CO2 on it. We have Oregon CCIs in there. So yeah, there's definitely multiple options for it. And if there's any thoughts on anything additional we should add, we're more than open to modeling some different things. So definitely let us know if you have any ideas. All right, if there are no other questions, I'm going to pause for a 10-minute break. We'll get back together about 5 minutes after around 2:35. And feel free to put chat any questions in the chat box while we're away, and we'll try to get them answered when we get back. Okay. All right, it is 2:35, so we'll get going again. I didn't see any questions in the chat, but are there any questions before we get going? All right, jump into planned scenarios and sensitivities. Sorry, didn't mean to turn that off. So this is our supply resource optimization process flowchart. So I'm just going to share the flowchart real quick, and then I'll jump into the next slides that kind of talk about each step. But you can see at each step we try to incorporate more stuff. So step one, the as-is analysis. This is where we plug in what we know, what we expect demand to be, what we have for supply, what we have for transport, pricing, weather, storage, emissions. This is what we know and what we currently have as is. And then we'll go over to step two, and this is where we generate some portfolios of various resource mixes, and we start including incremental DSM, incremental transport, RNG, hydrogen for renewables. We'll move to step three, weather simulations, price simulations. So we start running some stochastic analysis on these models. And then we rank these portfolios based on demand served. Are we hitting emission targets? What's the risk adjusted total system cost? And then step five, scenario analysis of candidate portfolio. We run the top ranking candidate portfolio through deterministic and stochastic scenario analysis. So we throw some more scenarios at it: customer growth, DSM, more RNG, or different type of DSM, different type of RNG, any gas bans, price impacts, incremental hydrogen. And then step six, we'll evaluate the candidate portfolio. We'll take qualitative and quantitative review of it. And then we ask ourselves, are there any concerns about it? If there are concerns, we'll take a look at the next ranked portfolio. If there are no concerns, then we'll consider it our preferred portfolio, and we'll move forward with that as the portfolio we plan to hit over the next, what is it, 28 years. Obviously it'll be adjusted as we do more and more IRPs. Did you have a question, Kathy?
Yeah, okay, I'm kind of hitting on this incremental hydrogen. What are your transport customers allowed to throw hydrogen on your transport lines? And how do you control the fact that you can only get a limited amount of hydrogen with your natural gas, at least with your current pipelines?
Yeah, so we do take into consideration with our hydrogen projections that we're only able to mix a certain amount. So we do take that into consideration with our hydrogen projections. Now, as to whether transport customers can put hydrogen on the system, I would have to open that up to other Cascade members to see if they had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can kind of just chime in, at least from a modeling perspective for this IRP cycle. I think we are viewing this incremental hydrogen resource, assuming that only we would be in full control of the blend quantities, blend volumes, and kind of be able to track the emissions reductions based on that. Your question is definitely an interesting one that poses a lot of potential issues that I think we probably will be exploring in future IRPs. But for this one, the incremental, anytime we refer to incremental hydrogen quantities, it's going to be us in full control of the blend quantities, blend timings, things of that nature. And it would be something that, while we're still talking about it from a theoretical perspective, because it's important to, we're not going to start actually implementing it until we've got all parties involved. So our gas supply folks, our engineering folks, comfortable with those blend levels, to the point where we believe it would be something that we can implement. So it's definitely still more theoretical on our end. It's something that, to answer your question, would be more in our control.
Okay, thank you. Have fun.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So this is kind of just a step-by-step of it instead of a flow chart. Step one as is, and there are a lot of things that we can do with these as is models. We can remove emissions and we can take kind of just an overall look at our transportation and not put any constraints on emissions. That way we can look at just transportation. Do we have any issues on our transportation? What can we do on our transportation if there are shortfalls? Can we solve those with on-system RNG, off-system on-system hydrogen? So we can do a lot of things with as is. We plug in emissions just because we know we have to hit emissions targets. But if we do that, we'll see some shortfalls, and then we have to do some digging. We may see some shortfalls. And we would have to do some digging to see, is this shortfall because of transportation? Is it because of emissions? That's why it's nice to have this ability to kind of mess with the optimization process and kind of test some different things out. Then we identify some portfolios. So we'll put in some incremental resources, different mixes, including transportation capacity, RNG, hydrogen, mixes of DSM. And we try to identify portfolios. Previously, when we did portfolios, when we weren't considering RNG and hydrogen, our only options were upstream supply. And so we were very limited on the portfolios. But now that we're looking at RNG, hydrogen, more DSM, there's definitely opportunities to identify different portfolios. And then we analyze these portfolios under expected conditions. And then we also do it under stochastic weather. So we do Monte Carlo simulations on weather, which provide us many different demand results that we can put in Plexos, and we can have Plexos optimize on all these different demand profiles. And it just gives us a better idea of what our risk is, and with not being able to hit emissions, not being able to serve customers. And so there's a lot of good stuff that comes out of running these stochastic models. And then we take a look at these models after we run this, and we rank them. Do they serve? First and foremost, we want to serve our customers. We want to be able to serve them. We want to hit emission targets. So if we're unable to hit emission targets, we'll have to figure out what to do there. If we need more transportation or an on-system project, we'll have to come up with a plan for that. So we rank these portfolios, and then we consider the cost as well. We want to make sure that we're keeping the customer's costs in mind. So we want to consider cost. And then that would be our top ranked portfolio. This is where we start doing some more scenario analysis, but we jump into that portfolio and we try and stress test it. We rerun it through Plexos Optimizer under 5 different scenarios, different customer counts, different energy efficiency, different amounts of RNG, hydrogen, gas bands, different gas pricing, and then we'll evaluate that. Once we run it and stress test it, if we like that portfolio, we decide to move forward with that portfolio. And we'll make sure to look at qualitative and quantitative. We have to make sure it makes sense. If we stick infinite amount of RNG in there, does infinite amount of RNG actually make sense? Probably not. But it's definitely something that we have to keep in mind. We have to look at this quantitatively, all the real results that come out of Plexos, and then you have to take a qualitative look at it as well. Make sure it makes sense. If there are any concerns, we'll go back and look at a different portfolio. Are there any questions with this process? This process is very important to the IRP and evaluating our portfolios. JP, yeah, you have a question?
Thanks, Brian. When would be the optimal time to get kind of feedback on scenarios or ideas for scenarios to you guys? Is that ASAP? Is that the next month? What would that, just in terms of you guys ranking the top portfolio, of taking the top candidate portfolio and kind of stress testing it?
Yeah, so as soon as possible would be great. We're finalizing putting the Plexos model together. We started creating different scenarios. And I know I'll be kicking it over to Devin pretty soon to talk about some of the scenarios we have in mind. We shared some scenarios, I want to say at tag 1 and tag 2. So we're open to feedback at any point. The sooner the better. Obviously, if we're filing our draft, it's kind of difficult to put new information in, but
right.
Yeah, as long as the sooner the better. And we're open anytime.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So here's some additional for portfolio considerations that we keep in mind. We want to make sure we get gas to the customers. The other thing is we have to make sure it's reliable. If we throw a project in there and it's not actually reliable, we have to think about that. I know the previous last couple of IRPs, we had our model kept picking up a storage facility we didn't have any a contract with, but that storage facility was not reliable. So we took a quantitative look at it and decided that it probably wasn't the best option to go with them. But we keep them in mind and we always consider them. Does it have a long lead time? So if we are looking at RNG hydrogen project, what's the lead time on that? Can we get it as soon as we say we can or think we can? So we have to consider that. How much does it cost? So we put pricing for RNG hydrogen and put CCIs in. So we have to consider the cost. Is it new build or is it depreciated cost? We have to consider rate pancake. So a rate pancake is on the transportation side. So let's say we pick up more NGTL. Well, when we transport NGTL, we transport it down to ABC, and then we put it on Foothills, which has another rate. And then we take that off at Kingsgate and put it on GTN, and that has its own rate. And if we take that gas off of GTN and put it on Northwest Pipeline has a rate. So we have to consider those rate pancakes when we're doing these portfolio considerations. Is it a base load or a peaking resource? How many decatherms are needed? So what's the amount? What is the shape of the resource? Is it tried and true technology? Is it a new technology or is it yet to be discovered? And who else is competing for this resource? So as everyone knows, probably in Oregon and Washington, we have a lot of competition for RNG and hydrogen right now. So we have to keep that in mind when we're doing our modeling. Are there any questions? I'm going to be kicking it over to Devin. So are there any questions for me before I do so? Okay, all right. How about it, Devin?
Thanks a lot, Brian. So yeah, what I want to talk about for a couple of minutes is some of the scenario planning we're doing. So JP, I appreciate the excellent lead into the subject. In the past, we've taken admittedly something of a more scattershot approach to our scenario and sensitivity analysis, where we've typically evaluated in excess of 20 or 30 different scenarios. But when I say evaluated, admittedly, we probably haven't done as robust of a job as we could have done with really trying to explain what those scenarios mean. So we may have looked at 6 or 7 different scenarios related to interrupted supply, for instance. And all we would do is present a bunch of numbers in the resource integration section and maybe make 1 or 2 comments about a result that seemed interesting. And we got a lot of feedback from the various stakeholders in our IRP process that they were hungry for more substantive analysis about these scenarios. And kind of we talked about it internally as a team, and we realized that less is probably more in this situation. If we kind of narrowed our field down to, in this case, the 6 scenarios that you see listed here, it gives us a lot more bandwidth to really do an in-depth analysis of them. And as Brian said a lot, from both that qualitative and quantitative perspective. So quantitatively, we can present a lot more information, as is actually required in most cases, I think, by statute, where we need to talk about what are going to be things like rate impacts. What do we think are going to be some of the risk variables we're looking at related to the quantitative side of it? Now we have a lot more bandwidth to commit to doing that robust analysis. And then qualitatively, we want to be able to talk about, because this is ultimately supposed to be a document that's accessible for the general public, we want to talk about what the results from these scenarios generally mean for people. So if we say something like we're running a scenario that we want to get carbon neutral by 2050, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what are some of the toggle switches or sensitivities that are changed in that scenario. We want to then be able to explain what are we actually gleaning from the results of that analysis. So if, for instance, it tells us that we need more RNG than we were initially potentially looking at in our base case modeling, that's valuable information to let our business development folks know, hey, we really need to get on it. Or if let's say it identifies that we need it potentially sooner than we might expect, it kind of sends the signal to those folks that, hey, if let's say our corporate goals decide to go in a certain direction, or legislation decides to go, could be a federal thing, we're prepared with these scenario analyses. So once again, for this IRP cycle, we're limiting it to the base case scenario and then 5 additional scenarios at this point. However, to JP's point, we're always interested in what more could we potentially do. We don't want to stretch our bandwidth too thin, but if stakeholders really felt passionate about maybe 1 or 2 different scenarios, or maybe they might even be modifications on some of these scenarios, we've been soliciting that feedback, frankly, since tag 1, like Brian said, where I think we presented this exact table or a form of this table, and we've had that other column in there and we keep it in there. If somebody has something that they really think would add value to this IRP process, we would love to hear about it now. And once again, to Brian's point, ideally sooner rather than later. The sooner that we get that information, the more likely it is that we'll be able to implement it into this IRP cycle, do that full robust analysis that we want to be able to do, that we're excited to do, frankly, to really present a nice holistic integrated project. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the different sensitivities that are toggled here. The sensitivities are on the left side of it, and the top are the scenarios. And then, so I'll talk a little bit about each of the sensitivities, and then we'll go into how those affect the scenarios in the next few slides. So customer growth, that's the first scenario, the first sensitivity rather, that you'll see. Basically, when it's going to be current expectations, we're looking at the load forecasting that Ashton discussed in great detail in tag 2. And we're going to assume in that sensitivity that if it's current expectations, that growth is going to continue to happen as expected through the planning horizon. However, we want to be able to toggle both for having no new customers. So that's the electrification scenario. What if by statute or for whatever reason we have to start cutting off customers by 2030? What impact does that have on results that we might see? But we also do want to look at the other side of it. While we are fully expecting to be compliant with the various legislations and that could have impacts on customer accounts, 10 years ago, we didn't know what the world was going to look like today. And 10 years from now, we might not know what the world would look like. So we want to be prepared with that high customer account analysis in that scenario. So we can give an idea of what might we have to do with still keeping in mind that we would have these emissions reduction requirements under a high customer count scenario. Energy efficiency, Brian alluded to this a little bit before. We have two CPA projections that we are running with this IRP. Our base case CPA projection simply looks at the avoided cost that I'm going to talk about later in this presentation, with some of the changes that we've made to it. But overall, our base case energy efficiency, taking what we expect our costs to be for like distribution costs, commodity costs, risk premium we'll talk about, and carbon compliance, taking those costs as we expect them, and that's that base case. But we also wanted to do this alternative CPA projection. What does our potential look like under higher energy efficiency potentials? Now in Oregon, that is a little bit tricky because a lot of what ultimately ends up being accomplished in the CPA is through the Energy Trust of Oregon. We don't, as a smaller utility here in Oregon, we don't have as much say in that. However, it is very likely that if we were to see a change in CPA, if something were to trigger it to be a change on our end, that change would happen probably along the state level. If we were going to see a higher than expected avoided cost, it probably wouldn't just be insulated to us. And so for that scenario 2 CPA projected, we provided an avoided cost that looks at that commodity element of the avoided cost and says, well, instead of it just being on the cost of traditional natural gas or fossil gas, what if it was based on a blend of the costs of RNG and hydrogen? What if that was the commodity element that we wanted to throw into the avoided cost calculation? How would that change what the avoided cost is? That's what that scenario 2 that you look at. And we're going to talk a little bit in the narrative. We've worked with our partners, both with Monica's team in Bellingham and our partners in ETO, that we want to really include a substantive narrative about not just saying what happened quantitatively, as we've explained how the numbers changed, but qualitatively, what exactly does this mean? What measures may now be cost effective that wouldn't initially be cost effective? What do we need to be kind of looking at, and what do these results tell us? And that'll be a part of that sensitivity. For renewable natural gas, we have our base case expectations on that. I do see JP has a question.
Hey, and I can hold off my questions till the end. I don't want to interrupt your flow. Do you want me to wait till the end?
I prefer to. I like the interruptions.
All right. Hey, on the CPA case, there's two questions. One is, Energy Trust is kind of bound by what they know. So, I know you know this, but like the avoided cost kind of drives, if you will, the potential measures, and to some degree, they just stop identifying things after a certain level because it's not worth it. And so a big increase in avoided costs actually opens up into areas where, as I understand it from them, they haven't even been looking at the measures won't even show up in the CPA because they just haven't been looking at them. How do you guys deal with that chicken and egg here? And then the other question is, and then the other question is just around, are you guys looking at efficiency measures for transport customers?
So that's two fantastic questions. On the first question, so it's my understanding, and you would definitely know a lot more about Energy Trust than I would, being your expertise and history working with them. But my understanding, going back to actually that UM 2178 docket, we've reached out to them in the past and said, hey, out of curiosity, can you present us with a theoretical potential that there might be that the market could have access to for measures that were not initially cost effective, but could be under a higher avoided cost? And they were able to give us quite a few measures that we were then able to populate our UM 2178 analysis with. So that was at least our launch point for thinking that there might be something else out there that a higher avoided cost could potentially dig into. The details of it, I certainly would not be an expert on. And if the results ultimately don't end up being something that has a major difference, we'll still obviously run with the results and we'll highlight that. It'll probably be, it would probably be a similar narrative to what you're saying, that, we evaluated this. Now, in terms of how it would actually happen, the way we'll probably end up explaining this qualitatively in the narrative when we discuss this. When I at least envision this scenario, I imagine this not being us saying, hey, let's go rogue and do something completely off base, but I would imagine it being kind of part of a whole systemic change to the avoided cost calculation. And this is not something I'm advocating for, although I think there is something to be said for it by any means, but it would be something that I at least theoretically would imagine occurring organically through the UM 1893 process, where as the utilities are kind of sitting and talking about these things, if it did theoretically come up where we were all like, hey, we should be changing the way that we are looking at commodity costs because of the new world that we're living in, and if all parties kind of were like, yeah, that makes sense, we should do that, it would be something that would cause that systemic change because it was fully kind of agreed upon and worked together with stakeholders from staff and all the LDCs kind of coming together and agreeing that, yeah, this is how we ultimately should be looking at doing it. So that's kind of how I envision it both being able to happen and then why I think we might be able to get some potential for results. But it'll be interesting, right? I never like to go into any kind of analysis with any kind of prejudices or biases beforehand. I have obviously what I'd like to see because it makes the narrative cooler in my opinion. But if the results end up being not what we want to see, we're not just going to sweep it under the rug. We're going to present that results and we're going to explain how it changes our story or our narrative. To your second question, I think that is extremely important. I don't think, is Alan Spector on the call? Because I know he had been working on some of that stuff, and I don't know if Monica, I don't know if you guys, or if you have any update on that, or maybe even who could be the one, but I'm going to pick on you because you're the person that I'm thinking of right now. Do you know if there are any conversations either in Washington or Oregon about that?
This is Mike. I can jump in.
Oh, excellent. Go ahead, Mike.
Right.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Mike Parvinen with Cascade Regulatory. Interesting. Oregon had the fact-finding meetings last week before last, workshops. Some of the things, a couple of the key components that came out of the fact-finding was, the commission talking about what are some things that they could do more immediately. And two components that kind of seemed to resonate were conservation. What can we do in the way of conservation as an immediate step? And the other one was this IRP process and looking at that, which I think is more scenario based and kind of the more you run things, the more information you gain, the better the information gets over time. Anyway, as a result of that, well, not as a result of that, but just the other day we had our kickoff meeting with the ETO, the annual budget discussion meetings. And that was something that we had a good conversation about was, that meeting was pretty much kind of the status quo. Here's our avoided costs. Here's what we kind of look at as our upcoming targets and what we're spending and so forth. And I raised a topic going, all right, but what if the avoided cost changes? I said, because quite frankly, we're looking at that next incremental resource. What does the IRP do? It looks at your avoided cost, but it's the avoided cost for that next incremental resource. And right now, that next incremental resource is RNG, right? Well, which is maybe not your most cost-effective resource, but it's needed to meet carbon compliance. So, should conservation be looked at on the same footing as RNG? As an example. So that means that the avoided cost discussion is something much bigger than, if we're going to get serious about conservation, we need to be looking at it a little bit differently than we have historically, which is based primarily on the natural gas and a little bit of distribution system. You do have a little bit of carbon avoidance in there, but it's comparing it to what are the resources necessary to meet your carbon compliance. And should we be doing a lot more in the conservation there? So the question I had for the ETO was, all right, if we go in and do something, I say we, that's kind of the global we, the commission, the companies, and all the stakeholders agreeing on what a avoided cost should be calculated and what it looks like. How fast could they ramp up? Because quite frankly, we're looking at an avoided cost that could be 2 to 3 times what it is currently. And what does that mean for conservation? And they felt that they were prepared to be able to do that. They may not have a CPA, but they could do some things. more rebates, a higher percentage of the rebate, the incremental cost of the measure is maybe more appropriate. From a utility perspective, we're buying the resource. So if we pay up to the avoided cost rather than some surrogate number, that may make sense. Maybe even more than where we can encourage customers to actually be proactive in acquiring the conservation before they're maybe necessarily ready. If you're paying for more than the incremental cost and that amount is cost effective under a different look at the avoided cost. So these are some things we just did some brainstorming with that we're open to. And that could happen pretty quickly. The other thing we did have a conversation about was transportation. And you know, at least from my perspective, and I believe the company is behind this too, going, look, there's no way we're going to meet our carbon compliance if we're not doing conservation for our transporters. They're about 70% of our throughput, right? So how could we meet carbon compliance if we're not doing conservation for them? There are some very interesting questions, though, that go along with that, including the avoided cost. Since we're not doing natural gas, what is the avoided cost? Is a key one. And who would pay for that? What customer classes? Those types of things. So again, the question to the ETO was, if we move this route to doing transportation, are you guys ready to move on it? And they seem to be ready to go. So as soon as we can identify some parameters, how we're going to measure it, what's the cost effectiveness, what's the potential, those types of things, what does the program actually look like? They're apparently ready to roll. And on that side note too, the utilities have a meeting coming up in regards specifically on this topic of transportation, going, how do we look at this? What should we even be thinking about, talking about, proposing, trying to get the utilities to get a little more organized and on the same page before we start talking to stakeholders. And I think there has been conversations with, you know, staff on the side, ETO on the side, AWEC on the side, you know, everybody's kind of touched on it. They know it's a reality, we got to do it, but how do we do it? So we're making steps.
Not to hijack the IRP conversation. So maybe, I don't know, Mike, and I don't know, to the whoever else, Mark and Alan, maybe we all get together and talk about where you guys are at and with Energy Trust. And then to the IRP, you know, I would hope that the scenario 2 or even the regular CPA projection would include that based on you know, Energy Trust budget gets nailed down here pretty soon. So for 2023, so that would be good to see that.
Yeah, I think with the IRP, you know, conjecture is something we obviously want to avoid. We don't want to put in anything without having a concrete idea of what could happen. Unfortunately, we're getting pretty close to the timelines on it. But if we had any kind of concrete information or ideas of what we could be looking at for that type of potential, it would be a fantastic resource to include in the IRP. And I agree 100% that if we have access to that, we will 100% want to include that in.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate the update on that. And yeah, I'll turn. Devin, just one final thought. What was forecasted for energy efficiency, and Mike, this is for you too, and talking with interest. What was forecasted in 2178 for energy efficiency? To us, seemed like it might be the floor for what you need to get from Energy Trust. So how those two, that also in IRP, how that all kind of connects to, we want to make sure the IRP is clear about. So
absolutely. Kathy, I see you've turned on your camera. I did know that I saw Kara raise her hand first, so I do want to offer her the opportunity to speak first. She has a question, and then I'd be happy to get to your question.
Yeah, happy to see it to Kathy if it's about this transportation efficiency. Is that your question, Kathy?
Yeah, I was going to suggest a scenario for where, you know, maybe increase in transport customers and decrease in transport customers, and because it seems like they really are a different category from your regular customers.
Yeah, we can. I think we can talk about that with the team. That might be something to incorporate in the high customer or electrification case, kind of in that customer growth as long as we did because I have a feeling that the two would happen hand in hand, even though they are a different and more substantive category. I would imagine if we're going to have less growth, if we're going to have for some reason to reduce customers on the core side, we probably would end up having a similar situation on the transport side. And conversely, if growth were to be higher on the core side, it would probably stand to reason that the same factors would be causing that. But it is a good point, and something I think we're going to want to take back to our team is like, how do we want to change those toggle switches to make sure that we're properly accounting for those transport customers?
Okay, as you can tell, I really don't like the fact that you have to worry about them.
I sympathize, and I appreciate your sympathizing.
Yeah, when I provided testimony on behalf of the League of Women Voters for the Climate Protection Program, and that was one thing that I included, was that the end users should be responsible.
I really appreciated your comments on that. Absolutely, from a personal perspective, I did hear that, and I appreciated that. Kara.
Thanks, Devin. This question about efficiency for transport customers is pretty interesting, and I wonder if it's something that could be teed up. I know you'll be talking about energy efficiency at the next meeting. I don't know if that could be sort of rolled in once you know a little bit more. Maybe you won't know enough by then, but it would be interesting to kind of see what you're thinking and what you've learned in the intervening weeks. Question about energy efficiency, and again, I know you're going to be talking about it in more depth at the next meeting, but could you just give us a little taste of what you're going to be considering modeling in those categories? You know, I'm trying to compare, and I know you're a different size company, but comparing Northwest Natural scenarios and sort of seeing how, they are pulling out, hybrid heating versus gas powered heat pumps, So anyway, if you could just give us a little taste of kind of what falls into that bucket, that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I will caution with is one thing that's very tricky about us versus Northwest Natural. It's something that we've had tons of internal discussions about is it something we may want to change on our end, is the fact that we don't do end use forecasting the same way that Northwest Natural does. So when it comes to being able to toggle some of those potential load sources, we don't have the same granularity. I would argue we have a different scale of granularity. Ours is much more granular on the location side of it, where we differentiate down to different city gates, while there's the thing is a much more statewide, but looks at end uses. So it's a different type of granularity. It has benefits in some sides, but this is one of the sides that frankly is somewhat of a downside, is because we don't do that end use, it's more difficult to specifically go into, let's say, the load forecast and say, okay, if this energy efficiency measure for a high efficiency water tank, for instance, can then specifically decrement this area of it. The way we kind of model and incorporate energy efficiency is similar to how we do it on the load forecast, is we roll everything up. So we go to energy efficiency or to ETO, and I think they will talk about this. I don't want to, I might ask Brian, because I know that he saw recently some of the things that they are looking at in terms of some of the top measures. So we could maybe shed some light early now onto some of that as to what some of those top measures might be. If Brian, if you have access to that at your fingertips by any chance. If not, Kara, we can certainly send it to you. But we take those measures, not just those top measures, but really all of those measures, and we kind of roll them up into a conservation potential for the Oregon conservation potential for each year. And then because our modeling and our load is done based on those city gates, is we allocate it to the city gates on each day proportionately based on the load expectation from those city gates. So for instance, in Oregon, Bend is probably going to get a more significant share of that load projection, that load reduction projection, versus say maybe a Madras, where there's just less load, so presumably there's going to be less of that. I hope that answers your question. If not, I can try to go into more of that, and if Brian has that information, definitely he can add on.
Yeah, appreciate it, and definitely don't want to derail, knowing that we'll be hearing more about it, but it's helpful to just kind of see these scenarios and think about, okay, well, what's going to be in them. So I think seeing the CPA will be helpful.
Absolutely.
Once you get there. And yes, if you have it in advance, if you're willing to share, it'd be interesting to look at.
Yeah, I think we could definitely give a top level taste if you have it, Brian.
So what I was looking at earlier this week was actually the measures from the 2020 Oregon IRP. So I don't have them yet for this IRP. Those will be coming soon. So I'll probably wait until
Gotcha.
tag
Sounds
forward
like the
to
next meeting is one not to miss.
Oh yeah. See that you have to
Yeah.
you have to leave them wanting more, right? That's how you end up getting returns. Yeah, and one thing also I could potentially, actually I don't think I have access. I was gonna say I might have some of that information about Washington, but I don't think I have access to that, at least to give once again a kind of scope idea of what some of those top Washington measures were. But I think it ultimately will be best to, because we're really gonna do a deep dive on it, about what some of those measures are. And then, like I said, my objective, my ideal would be in that kind of both the quantitative and qualitative side when we're presenting both what the difference in numbers might be, and then also explaining how that's going to happen, is I really want to try to present in the body of the IRP what are some of the major measures that either go up, go down, kind of shift proportionally based on changing that avoided cost, as we talked about earlier just recently. But great, yeah, this was an awesome discussion. Thank you everybody for the feedback about that. So that was, I believe, energy efficiency. Going into renewable natural gas. So a lot of our expected availability for that is going to be based on a 2019 study done by the AGF in conjunction with the ICF, I believe, American Gas Foundation, and I don't remember off the top of my head what ICF stands for, but basically they did this really good potential study about what they're expecting RNG availability to be going out to 2040. I believe in an earlier tag process, or I certainly know during our UM 2178, we talked a little bit about what do we expect our, and I always hate using this term, but our share, because obviously we have no entitlement to any RNG, but what do we expect our share would be with comparing our size to really the size of national load as is presented by EIA's sales data. So we kind of get an idea of how big are we on the state or the nationwide scale, and then we can look at some of those national projections with a kind of understanding that, hey, we are probably going to be a little bit more aggressive than maybe some of the middle America states, some of the states where there's not as much a push for carbon legislation. With that understanding that we might be a little bit more aggressive, that gives us something of an edge, I would say, in the amount that we're going to be able to acquire. Regionally, obviously, it's extremely competitive, but if we're looking at so we have no edge there, I would say, but on a nationwide scale, we might have a little bit of an edge for acquiring some of those resources, especially when considering Oregon, which, although nothing has been codified to my knowledge yet, it does seem like we are somewhat confident, I will say, that a book and claim model will be acceptable in terms of how RNG is going to be recorded towards those emissions reductions. So it does provide more access to maybe that resource than, say, maybe in Washington, where that may not be as certain for us. So when you see things like high availability, it's us kind of having that confidence that we may be able to secure more, but we do also want to model for the potential that maybe we don't get as much as we initially thought. Maybe it just doesn't manifest, or there's more competition. So that's what that low availability. Kathy, I see you have a question.
Does that mean, are you talking about buying the environmental attributes and then using them to cover your own natural gas?
Correct. Yes.
Non-renewable natural gas?
Correct. Yeah. So that would be my understanding. My understanding, and I'm not an expert on this by any means, but my understanding of the Oregon policy at this point is, as long as there's a common pipeline, one could, I know this is something that Northwest Natural has talked about during their presentations quite a bit, but one could acquire renewable natural gas in, say, a Kansas or anywhere really in the United States, and as long as it could theoretically be piped to the Pacific Northwest, one can claim that attribute, that renewable attribute, and kind of attach it to a traditional natural gas molecule, for lack of a better term, from that book and claim perspective to count it towards your emissions reduction.
Yeah, I assume you may have more of a problem if you, I don't know if your natural gas that goes for your electric plant is sold in, the electricity is sold in Oregon, you may not be able to use the RTCs for those.
I believe in
Because it's not
Oregon,
in 2040. In 2040, it becomes non-emitting.
It's my understanding that we are not responsible for electric generation in Oregon. So I don't believe.
You aren't under the CPP, but you may be under HB 2021 indirectly.
Gotcha. Understood.
You know,
Yeah.
your electric utility is going to come back and say, we got to cut down just the same way you have problem with your transport customers.
Sure.
They're going to come in and say,
Sure.
we don't have any control over what you're sending us. So
Sure. That's definitely something that could be a consideration. Absolutely.
yeah, I think Avista is the only other one that has one, but I think they sell their electricity to Washington.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, very good points. And I very good points. Yeah. Hydrogen is a similar story to RNG, right? The expectations for that are less based on a volumetric competition, or at least the constraints, I should say, are less based on a volumetric issue and more on or rather less based on competition, apologies, more based on that volumetric constraint that we alluded to earlier when Kathy asked the question about hydrogen and transport customers. It's something that we're monitoring very closely. We're monitoring. Northwest Natural is doing some fantastic pilot studies. I've attended conferences that have talked about hydrogen blending. It's not something we're going to do until we're confident we can do it safely, securely, and effectively. But it is, I believe, going to be a significant part of our future to some extent, right? And so we'll talk about in the different scenarios, how do we toggle the blending on that? In some scenarios, maybe we assume a more aggressive blending philosophy. In some scenarios, maybe we assume a less aggressive blending philosophy. And we'll kind of talk about that in each of the scenarios. The gas bans we'll talk about as well. The major one for Oregon that we look at is the Oregon Climate Action Program, I think. Forget the name of it, but I know that there's significant movement in Bend that we are paying close attention to. And that is something we're trying to figure out how exactly we want to incorporate into that modeling. And then we also look at some additional bans. More of that, I believe, is in Washington. We may go into it. I think we talk about our bans quite a bit. We're going to be talking about it during our Tag 4 presentation. But we do kind of want to highlight that the current bans that we really are significantly looking at is more so Washington, the Bellingham bans that they have up there. But we are kind of monitoring everything going on in Bend, making sure that everything we're doing is in compliance with that and seeing how that might have any impact on our potential load forecast, which in turn reduces theoretically potentially our emissions. JP.
Thanks, Devin. I appreciate you just handling all the interruptions or the questions.
Oh, sorry.
Hey, just real fast on the just in terms of the IRP, just putting a placeholder out there in terms of you have a scenario around expected availability, high and low. Totally appreciate that. And just a marker for us, the extent to which the description of the supply side resource kind of matches up with the scenarios, so we can kind of like draw a line between what you're seeing as a scenario for high and what that means in terms of the resource acquisition that would be required of the firm. But it's kind of more for Brian, maybe, as you're putting together that part of the IRP, just being able to draw that line, kind of like we talked about with energy efficiency too. If you're talking about like what Mike talked about, if you're modeling these really high scenarios that get you there, understanding what it would take to actually do that in a really short amount of time, and how much would come from RTCs and how much would be coming from regionally sourced resources would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an interesting line that I'm excited to dive into with some of the qualitative analysis that we want to do, because in some situations it would absolutely require more ramp up. So for instance, and I think we talked a little bit about kind of a causal effect relationship in carbon neutral, for instance, when I get to that slide, you'll see that to get more than expected renewable natural gas, for instance, it will require us to be more competitive in the market. That may require us to have a higher average cost for RNG, or at least at some of the higher tranches, or it introduces a new tranche that we may not have done in our base case modeling. So if, let's say, in our base case, we are saying that our highest cost of RNG would be $19 per decatherm, it may require us to go above that to start hitting a certain level where we're not getting the low hanging fruit. We're not even getting the mid hanging fruit anymore. We're really starting to take anything and everything that we can get at those price points. So we end up talking about that, and then getting into the quantitative side of it. Ideally, I hope that we're going to be able to present. I don't want to promise anything, although it is something that we have to comply with. And so I'm presuming we'll be able to, but, we hope to be able to present what the rate impact would be of something like that, right? Where in a situation like that, where we need to acquire more RNG and there's a cost impact on that, we could show a delta of the rate impact that's going to be needed to hit that higher mark. Some of it, however, is going to not necessarily be a causal effect relationship, but it's more of it just happens. So for instance, just kind of looking through these right now, I guess the higher customer accounts, right? In a situation like that, that wouldn't be we took X action to lead to higher customer accounts. It's more of this is a different path the world could take that would lead to a different result. And so that, once again, is going to be part of that qualitative analysis, is explaining that there's not an action that would need to be taken to hit that mark, but more so this is a different world state that could end up happening. Similar, I guess, also the low RNG availability, right? Like, there's no action that we may necessarily take that could lead to a lower than available. We could be just as competitive as we have always been wanting to be for RNG. The world just might catch up, for lack of a better term. And so that would be a different world state, that it's not necessarily a causal relationship. But I do agree with you. And I think when there are those causal relationships, it'll be important for us to highlight what actions we need to take, like the example I gave with the higher price point that we model to acquire more RNG. I think that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's the gas bans we talked about. And then finally, natural gas price. I already kind of alluded to that a little bit, where some of it's going to be on the traditional price and some impacts to that. Some of it will be adjustments to the renewable price, whether it's renewable hydrogen or renewable or just RNG. Some of the biogas that we're looking at is what might be some of those relationships, some of those causal effects that we want to make sure that we're modeling. And we kind of talk about that. So we can move forward now into each individual scenario description. I actually spent a lot more time talking about a lot of these than I expected to. So I'm going to try to get through these a little bit quickly, just for the sake of everybody's time. But by all means, if there is something you want to talk about more, please do stop me, and I'll be happy to go into more details about it. Our base case, I will stop on or talk about a little bit, because I think it is important to really understand what we're modeling from a base perspective. That main element of it is it's the expected values for all of those sensitivities, right? So for our customer growth, it's based on that load forecast. Once again, that Ashton did a great job presenting in tag 2. For energy efficiency, it's going to be based on those conservation potential assessments that we do in Washington and that we get from ETO in Oregon. For RNG, it's going to be what we predict to be our share of that blend of the high and technical from the AGF ICF study. And we talked about this a little bit in UM 2178. We choose that point as our base point for RNG availability. Some may argue that it is a little bit aggressive, but once again, I do believe that we are more aggressive players on a national scale than many others, or we will be, I should say, right? Obviously, we only have really one project under contract, so I don't think it's fair to yet call us aggressive players, but I do expect that we will be more aggressive players, at least looking at the world state or the national state at the way it is. So I think it's fair to say that we can be looking at those higher or those technical blends. One thing I'll also pause really quick, because I think it's an important element to emphasize. When we talk about when we talk about these scenarios and these kind of constraints, these are the high points that we model, right? So if in an RNG availability, for instance, we tell the model that you can take up to 20 million decatherms of RNG, that is the maximum that we are telling the model it can take. We're not telling the model, hey, you're taking 20 million decatherms. It's a potential cap that ultimately the model probably won't and usually doesn't go up to that cap. So just because we set those baselines so high doesn't mean that we're saying we're expecting that we're going to acquire all of that resource. And if we do end up having to hit that cap, I think that's something that's worthy of discussion in the narrative, right? Of saying like, we are, let's say, I'm just throwing random numbers in 2045, we need to maximize our RNG, and that's going to require a really aggressive push. So that's a good qualitative discussion that I think we're going to have in the IRP. The question was asked, what kind of hydrogen, what color hydrogen we're looking at. For this IRP, I believe we are only looking at green hydrogen at this point. It's my understanding there's quite a bit of other types of hydrogen. There's blue hydrogen, turquoise hydrogen, pink hydrogen that all have different pros and cons, both from an environmental perspective, price perspectives, potential availability perspectives. But because it's, frankly, I think the most generally accepted at this point type of hydrogen, we would be looking at green hydrogen. So our price forecast, for instance, comes from an analysis that was done on green hydrogen pricing. And the blending is, I don't know if there's a different blend, frankly, from the different colors of hydrogen. I don't think so, because it's just different ways of ultimately producing the same molecule. But the pricing, which I guess is really what the type of hydrogen from our perspective ultimately impacts, the pricing is based on green hydrogen price forecast that we have. That I think other regional LDCs actually are using a similar forecast for. Thank you for the question, Kara. And that was, so that's, yeah, so that RNG hydrogen in our and availability. Well, actually, so that's a good question. I think the perspective that we've taken from a modeling perspective, we are assuming that hydrogen will not come online, at least from even a potential perspective, until 2025. But it's typically priced out of being an available resource because it is so expensive in short term. So I think I actually just looked at this. The first year that it even becomes an available resource, it's something like $19 per decatherm. Or actually, I think it's $19 per MMBT. I think it is per deca. I don't remember the exact, but the point is, it's $19 for that resource. And then on top of that, you need more hydrogen than traditional natural gas because of the lower burn quality of it. So I think from a model, we've chosen to make a modeling decision that the constraint for hydrogen isn't going to be availability. It's going to be the amount that can be blended. There's a big national push actually for hydrogen. While some of it might end up being for transportation, we are choosing to take a perspective from this IRP that the bigger constraint, or the more troubling constraint that we need to model for, is how much can you put into the pipelines versus what that availability might be, because there is less information about what do we think the availability might be for hydrogen. One thing I will say is, if we do ultimately see the model taking quite a bit of hydrogen, we absolutely will highlight that in the IRP, and we'll kind of talk about, once again, it would never come up in the 2 to 4 year action plan. I shouldn't say never, but I don't expect that it would come up in the 2 to 4 year action plan, because first of all, it's not even an available resource for the model in the first 2 years. And then on top of that, in the first, I would say 4 years plus, once it is available, it's probably going to end up being price prohibitive. But if we do end up seeing in the planning horizon a significant amount of hydrogen being taken, we absolutely will make sure to highlight that and talk about the fact that it's contingent on us being able to acquire that resource, which it is right now. Definitely, while there's a lot of potential and a lot of investment going into it, it is something of an unknown. Kathy.
I wonder, are you considering at all possibly changing your model entirely and getting into distributing hydrogen in something other than in your pipelines? For example, to some of your big industrial customers, or somehow getting it to them on site rather than through pipelines?
So that's a fantastic question. Talking about kind of dedicated hydrogen kind of microsystems, right? Essentially having a micro pipeline for, or micro distribution system for, let's say, a larger industrial customer where it would only be hydrogen, so you don't have to worry about some of the blending challenges with that. It's something that we are certainly interested in. I don't think we have enough knowledge or expertise, frankly, about it to incorporate it in this IRP, but it's something we are definitely keeping an eye on. We know that there are people that are promoting and talking about those kind of microgrids. I think we can certainly put some qualitative language in the IRP about letting people know that it's something we're certainly willing to consider. But in terms of quantitatively being able to model it, I don't think we feel comfortable that we have enough information at this point.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering whether you were even thinking about it. So it sounds like, yes, you're thinking about it. So that's encouraging. Maybe that's one way of getting rid of some of your transport customers.
Yeah, there's a lot. I think there's some great potential. Alan, who's not on this call, he recently went to, I believe it was Denmark. I know it's a couple places in Europe where hydrogen is much more prevalent, and he gave us a fantastic briefing on that. And so I think, I'm really excited to hear kind of some of the stuff that he might be able to lead the charge on with that, because it is something that I think could be a very significant portion of our solution as that technology begins to manifest in the future. Caleb, did you have a question?
Nope,
okay.
sorry, just misclicked.
Oh, no worries. So moving on, natural gas bans, it's consideration of all expected bans. That mostly, once again, it's my understanding, Brian can correct me if I'm wrong, mostly that has to do with how we want to incorporate in Washington the Bellingham ban, although we will talk about in detail in Tab 4 what we expect from Bend and what our compliance might have to be with regards to that. And then finally, the natural gas price is simply based on our 2023 price forecast, which we talked about during Tag 2. So scenario 2 would be, what if instead of the various targets we have, what if we shot to be carbon neutral by 2050? And so that would be 0 emissions by 2050. We specified that's by CCA and CPP guidelines. So that still does allow the purchase and acquisition of, let's say, auction allowances or CCIs in Oregon. Just kind of as a point of contention, we're not trying to say that it would be 100% just RNG or something like that. For this particular modeling exercise, just a caveat in the interest of transparency and clarity, that would be a variable that's still included in the modeling. Customer growth would remain the same in this scenario. Energy efficiency would be that higher CPA that we talked about, based on using the higher avoided commodity costs into the avoided costs. RNG availability, we would assume, would be higher. Once again, we're going to take the technical potential from that. We'll talk about that actually in the narrative. And what is the consequence of that? Well, you can see any volumes that we would acquire above and beyond the base case would be at that higher price. It would be at that $26 per decatherm that we identified as the higher price tranche for that increased need to acquire more RNG. So kind of getting once again to JP's question is what is going to be that causal relationship? Well, we're not just going to say we magically get more RNG. We really, in this scenario, we'd have to dig for it, for lack of a better term, pardon the wordplay. We'd have to really, to hit it hard. In order to do that, we'd have to end up paying more potentially for it. We'd also increase the potential for a higher hydrogen blend. Something somewhat controversial, we definitely recognize 30% is a higher number than 20, and it's also, there have been 20% was the initial number that we used based on a study done I have it documented, but I don't remember exactly who did it. I apologize, and I can pull it up if somebody's interested. But there was a study that was done that said 20% is what people generally assumed. And granted, it was as of a couple of years ago, would be a safe blending rationale. This assumes that you go up to 30, which I've talked to people and I've seen some studies that 30 is not a completely irrational number to be looking at. So it assumes that you really kind of have to crank every knob to 11, for lack of a better term, and kind of, full steam ahead. So this would allow that to go up to 30, once again, as the constraint. Not saying it has to use 30% of our volume as hydrogen, but at least it has the access to do that if it needs to. Natural gas bans would be the same, and we've also talked a little bit about the price. Although one also interesting in this is that there would be a downward adjustment. This is something of a more qualitative. 10% is not necessarily scientifically derived. I like to use 10% when making any kind of qualitative adjustments, because I look at what the Northwest Power Conservation Council used as their general catch-all for lack of a term, putting a thumb on the scale. And I think 10% is kind of a good using that precedent. So kind of following along with that, we would adjust the traditional gas price downward. The rationale for that being there would be less competition for that resource. Also, we could be more discriminate about what deals we were to make theoretically, as we're ultimately phasing down our acquisition of that traditional gas, which theoretically allows us to be more competitive in the market and acquire that natural gas at a lower price. So I think doing that 10% adjustment is prudent in this scenario. Moving on to number 3. So limited RNG availability, the basic element of this one, as we talked about, what if there's both less RNG that we could get and we have to take a more conservative approach to hydrogen blending? All this still keeping in mind, we still have emissions targets that we need to hit. Customer growth would remain the same. We would definitely need to lean on energy efficiency in this kind of scenario. And potentially even kind of as talked about, if we have any information about that transportation energy efficiency, if we could have some information about that, that would be a valuable resource to evaluate in a scenario like this as well. The RNG availability would now be that low potential versus some of the higher potentials in those studies, and the maximum hydrogen blend would be a much more conservative 5%. We'd assume the same gas bands, and we would assume the same geologic price. We're still debating internally about what would be the price for RNG in this scenario. There's some consideration for using a higher price, assuming that that rationale for the lower than expected RNG availability ends up being more competition for that resource. It wouldn't be unreasonable to say that if more people are bidding for that resource, even though we're getting a lower share, we may even have to pay more for that lower share. So we're still debating that. We'll report ultimately what we decide when we have these scenarios finalized and modeled. We'll report what ultimately was the decision and included in the IRP narrative. Scenario 4 would be increased electrification. This actually models a similar process that was presented to us in the 2178 fact-finding mission, where we have lower than expected load projections now due to both discretionary electrification and increased regulatory bans. So on the electrification end of it, it comes from that customer growth, where it gradually reduces to 0 growth in 2025 and thereafter. Customer growth in the residential commercial rate class, I think there's a typo in there. No, and then it's reduced to 10% of what it was by 2050. Yeah, so it's to 0, no growth going up to 2025, and then it starts to decline, going down to our customer count, not our customer count goes down to 10% what it was at the start of the IRP process by 2050. So more and more customers are beginning to electrify in this kind of scenario. We're losing a significant portion of that. What is the impact of that? And that's going to be one where the impact to rates is going to be very interesting to do that analysis of, something that we will present in the narrative, right? As you lose growth, what could potentially be the impact of that? The energy efficiency, presumably there's part of the electrification would be a push towards energy efficiency. So we're going to use that higher commodity cost input in the energy efficiency. RNG availability and hydrogen availability wouldn't change. Natural gas bans in this scenario, we would really try to impact any and all proposed and enacted gas bans that we've seen. So this kind of throws everything at it. As we do our research, and we'll talk about once again in Tag 4, all of the scenarios and things that we're hearing and considering, and we'll really kind of throw it all into there and say, what is going to be the impact if every proposed gas ban comes online and begins to impact what our potential for growth is in some of our various service territories. Obviously, we're going to have less gas we're going to need to buy. So with that same rationale for being able to be more judicious in the market, we're going to assume a 10% price adjustment. Scenario 5 is kind of the flip side of that. What if we have higher than expected customer growth? Once again, staying agnostic to the reason why that might be, but I think it's important to do that holistic scenario analysis. So it is something we want to evaluate. If we assume we have the same emissions reduction requirements, which we would, but we have now higher customer growth, that's further we have to move the needle down. How is the model going to be able to solve for that? Can it solve for that? Something we're going to want to do the analysis on. So it's based on a high growth projection from Ashton's load forecast that we talked about. Energy efficiency, obviously, once again, we're going to have to really crank the needle on that one to be able to try to hit higher growth. So that's something we would definitely want to be able to consider. We're going to have to be more aggressive in the RNG market once again. So it's that higher RNG potential, higher hydrogen potential, and that same increase to the cost of those resources. Final one's kind of an interesting scenario. We talked about this in our 2020 Oregon IRP action plan. To some extent, this idea of modeling for extreme events, right? We talked a little bit during the last TAG meeting about how that happens in the stochastic modeling, those kind of price spikes you may recall that we talked about that we sometimes see in some of that stochastic modeling where price could go up to around $20 per decatherm, for instance. And so we really want to talk about in this, what is that full holistic scenario going to look like? And so the main element of this is going to be an indiscriminate stochastically derived incidence. So what do I mean by that? We basically don't want to ascribe something to it. One could say it, theoretically, we saw in the past there was an explosion at Enbridge that caused a supply shock, and there was a price shock associated with that. That's one example of something that could happen, but it's not the only thing that could happen, right? There could be political reasons why it could happen. There could be legislative reasons why it could happen. For whatever reason, we don't want to ascribe a specific reason up to what's happening, just that there is an interrupted supply, and we want to try to model what could be the impact of that. Customer growth wouldn't be impacted. Energy efficiency would be our base case. RNG wouldn't be impacted. Hydrogen availability would not be impacted. Gas bans would not be impacted. But natural gas price would obviously be the biggest toggle in this, along with the availability of natural gas. Once again, because of that interrupted supply. We're looking at a kind of potentially building, we're still kind of talking about how we want to do it, but the vision that I at least have for this would be to potentially build something of a new stochastic model where it randomly tries to identify when an incident might happen. And then if the randomizer chooses that this year, 2027 or whatever, is the year that it happens, basin prices immediately spike to the 99th percentile of our stochastic pricing. And then stochastically each year, there will be an amount that will come back online, right? Once again, I don't mean to pick on the Enbridge incident, but similar to that, over time, prices slowly crawled down as supply started to come back online, but it's definitely not a steady level, right? It kind of happens at a choppy rate. Another incident that I think is a good example is the LNG explosion. Once again, using an explosion, but that happened at Freeport, where that caused, ironically enough, a different price impact. That caused the price to fall, and that had to do with more LNG demand. But as that's coming back online, we're seeing prices continue to rise, but it's not at a steady rate. So it would kind of, all of this would have to do with randomness and kind of trying to capture that randomness to identify when do incidents happen, how do things start to normalize, and then does it happen again during the planning horizon. We're still figuring out the details of this, but I'm really excited for it because I think it's once again, it's about the narrative, right? It's fine like in the past how we would just throw a bunch of numbers at it, but this allows us to tell an interesting story of a potential planning horizon that could happen with interruptions and shocks, and what does that have from that integrated element that we need to do? How does it affect our emissions reduction goals? How does it affect our rates? How does it affect our ability to serve all of our customers in a least cost, least risk manner? Taking all of that and doing a full integrated analysis is the objective of these scenarios, and I think we could tell a really interesting story based on this scenario and all the scenarios, frankly. I think that's everything that I have to talk about. I realize I took a lot of time, so I really apologize for that. But we had some great conversation. I think that was awesome. Are there any other questions before I kick it over to Ashton? If not, go ahead and take it away, Ashton.
Great, thanks, Devin. We are running kind of short on time, so I'm going to try to fly through the next 6 or 7 slides. Essentially, what we're looking at with alternative resources is we are creating, what's a good metaphor? We're creating a menu for Plexos to choose from. And it's going to choose, of course, like Brian had mentioned, based off of cost and emissions targets, things like that. So when we talk about all these things on the next few slides, it's just a menu that we're creating, and then we're going to allow Plexos to kind of point us in the right direction. So once a shortfall or a deficiency is identified, Cascade's going to analyze a bunch of potential solutions. And we have conversations with various partners at different pipelines, storage facilities that we have contracts with, ones that we don't, new supply sources possibly. We're going to have conversations. We're going to try to model options that maybe we don't currently know about. We're going to try to get information, model those, get those into Plexos as a potential solve. Emissions reduction planning has also added another level of planning, of course. It's really spiced up the modeling, so that's a lot of fun as well. And then, at the end of the day, we're going to land on a preferred portfolio, kind of like Brian had talked about. We can go to the next slide, and we'll start mapping out some of these, what these potential solves might look like and where they're at. So I like looking at a map. So here's kind of a big, broad overview of all the different alternative resources we might look at. I'm going to zoom in on different parts here so that we don't have to, be inundated with all the names at once. So here we're kind of up at the north side on the Canadian border. We're looking at some incremental transport from north to south. So this could be on that green pipeline, that's NGTL, that's NOVA. We could increase capacity on there. And then you'll notice that comes from ACO, which is that cheap gas, but that feeds directly into Foothills. So we could get some additional capacity there. Finally, it gets to Kingsgate, where then it gets put on GTN, which is where our system is connected to. So you've got 3 different pipelines it's got to go through before it gets to us. So Brian had alluded to earlier how we are looking at a little bit more capacity on Nova and Foothills to better align with the capacity that we have on GTN, so that we're not so bottlenecked up there in that Canadian region, and we can really take advantage of that cheap ACO gas. And again, that primarily serves those Oregon customers. It just goes right down GTN into Oregon. So we can go to the next slide here. If we look over a little more west, this would be incremental transport on Northwest Pipe. So the previous slide was kind of more focused on the eastern side of Washington, GTN, that stuff. Now we're kind of looking at that left side. We're looking at, would an I-5 mainline expansion make any sense? Would a Wenatchee lateral expansion make sense? What about something that goes up towards Spokane? And then, of course, Eastern Oregon mainline expansion. So we'll kind of allow Plexos to choose these if it wants to, and that kind of gives us an idea of if it makes sense or if it just absolutely isn't cost effective. And we can jump into the next slide. So here we're going to zoom out a little bit, and we're kind of going to look at, so we talked about north to south. We're going to look at what can we pull up from the southern regions. So incremental Opal is just think of it like the Rockies Basin, essentially. So we can pick up, more supplies from them. Of course, we allow Plexos to take, as much as it needs from the supply basins. But when we're talking transportation, we might want some more incremental capacity going up GTN from the south. It's not as common. We do flow a little bit on Ruby currently, but we want to give Plexos the option to add more to Ruby. So Ruby's going to go from Opal over to Turquoise Flats, and then it'll go up GTN. So that's another option. It doesn't come out as very cost effective just due to the rate pancake, as Brian had talked about. It's just different costs as you keep traveling from pipeline to pipeline. So it doesn't always, it's not always cost effective, but we don't want to make that decision. We want Plexos to let us know. So that's why we put that down as an option. You can go to the next slide here. And then we have incremental transport bilateral. So this would be things that maybe go in between the Northwest Pipe and GTN. So if you look at the north there, right at the border, T-South Southern Crossing could be an opportunity to take some of that ACO gas that normally is at Kingsgate going down GTN, and maybe we could, pay for the transport over into that Sumas area and possibly do some price arbitraging. And then, of course, the Pacific Connector down by Malin on the south. That could be something that maybe gets to an LNG facility that may or may not, be built there someday. So just things that we want to allow Plexos to choose from. Again, just kind of point us in the right direction. I think this is one of my last slides here. So incremental storage. We don't currently have storage with places like Spire, Magnum, or ACO Hub or Clay Basin, but we don't want to just write it off. We always want to be looking for opportunities for storage. So what we'll do is we'll periodically contact these storage facilities, get their most updated pricing, put that into Plexos, previously put it in the send out, and we allow them to select it if it makes sense financially. So you'll see ACO Hub, of course, is just right up there, right next to the ACO supply basin. Magnum and Clay and Spire are down in the south by the Opal and Rockies regions. Spire is previously called Rickman Creek. So if you've heard of that, then you know of Spire. And then I think there's some one more storage slide here. So we also added some California storage facilities. Once you get that far into California, I mean, the rate pancake, it's probably not going to make sense with all the different, reservation rates you have to pay to get onto our system. But again, we just want to put it in there just in case. As you can see, Mist is on here as well, and we have 2 Mist accounts. So it definitely makes sense to be adding all these different storage accounts to see if they make sense. And in the past, it's really benefited us and our customers. And then incremental supplies. We talked about Opal, but the other two would essentially just be, RNG and hydrogen. We don't necessarily, unless there's a specific project, I'm not gonna directly connect it at any specific point, but we do want to know if Plexos is going to select it based off of pricing and availability. So we'll just kind of, add that in as a direct plug into the distribution system and see what it takes. Same with RNG and hydrogen, just see what it takes. And of course, we dive deeper when it comes to specific projects and things like that. I think that's all I have. If there are any questions, if not, then I think I'm throwing it back to Devin.
Yeah, I was just gonna do a quick time check. We have about 25 slides left, it looks like. So we are gonna go a little bit past 4 o'clock. We haven't taken a break in about an hour and a half, so let's take a quick 5-minute break and then we'll finish out this meeting. So we'll come back at 4:03. All right, everyone, it is 4:03. Thanks for sticking with us. We have gone over a bit, but that's because of all the great discussion that we've had so far. So we'll try and wrap this up in the next 30, 45 minutes. So I'll kick it over to Devin so he can get to it.
Brian, it sounded more like a threat than a promise, but I'll do my best. Okay, so we're gonna quickly touch on some price forecast results. We did promise this from the last tag meeting. Fortunately, some of these results have to be confidential since this is a public meeting, and we can't really go into specifics about what our price forecast is, obviously for competitive advantage reasons. But we will talk about what we can. We also do talk about the price forecast in the IRP, and there are some items that those who need to have access to it can have access to it through confidential treatment in the actual IRP. So as a reminder, in the last tag process, we talked a little bit about how we go from the various sources that we have to a final forecast, and the main thing is about weighing those sources. And so this is the final results for that age dampening mechanism. And you can see here two things really to note. That interpolation process happens starting at T+12 going downward. As we talked about, we want to try to stop moving away from, it's not really a spoiler to say, market prices, and so we have it told in the past that in the short term, we use those Henry Hub forwards, or rather it was NYMEX forwards for not just Henry Hub, but also our basins, to move away from those forwards and more towards some of the other more long-term sources. And you can also see that the age dampening mechanism does come into play right around T = 56, where that source 2 ends up taking a rather large decrement and the other sources then getting lifted up as a result of it. So we talked a little bit about what are some of the things that trigger that. This is just kind of showing how that happens in process. Anyway, next slide. And so here is our actual price forecast locked in, I believe, as of the day that it is locked in for the IRP, which is 5/23/2022. So you'll see the black line is NYMEX. Some of the other lines on there, red for Sumis, green for Rockies. The only thing that's interesting that I want to note here is the upward movement happening in the short term. So you'll see that period from between June 22 to May 23 is one that I think everybody who pays attention to gas prices is talking about right now. And it's actually kind of interesting. If we had held this meeting 2 weeks ago, like Brian said, we would be having totally a different conversation about this, which really goes to show the volatile nature of gas prices. Those who have been paying attention would know that when that Freeport LNG explosion did happen and the result from it, that large spike that happened where it went over $10 dropped back down to, I believe it was under 8. Unfortunately, gas prices rebounded, and when I checked as of yesterday, they were in that upcoming winter period back above $10. I do believe they may have regressed a little bit today, but I haven't had a chance to look at the close prices just yet. It's just fascinating, right? It's one of those things, and that really kind of leans on the importance of that long-term planning and not just relying on some of the short-term stuff you need, and why we do pay attention to those long-term sources, because they look at more market fundamentals that extend on beyond just short-term shocks. It's also, in my opinion, it leans on the importance of that 6th scenario that we talked about. We really need to show what kind of modeling needs to be done, and talk about the results from that modeling for those extreme pricing events, because they happen. Yes, this wasn't a $20 spike, but there's nothing to say that that couldn't have happened. And this was just one event that happened to happen a couple of that we're actually still actively in the middle of. Once again, it goes to show how important that I don't want to say resilience planning, because this isn't an emergency plan, but just being cognizant and understanding the impacts of these shocks are for that long-term planning process. So now I'm going to get into the avoided costs. Really excited to talk about this because we've made some really interesting changes related to a couple of items. I'm going to go a little bit quick once again, try to be respectful of everybody's time since we are coming near the end of the day. But if there's anything anybody has any questions about, please do stop me. I think place that there's some really interesting stuff here. So part of the IRP process, we now produce a 28-year price forecast instead of just a 20-year forecast, and 45 years of avoided costs. That extended amount is just because some measures go out that long. This was already alluded to by, I believe, Mike Parvin and others, but the avoided cost is an estimated cost to serve the next unit of demand with a supply side resource at a point in time. It's supposed to be that counterbalance where if you have energy efficiency on one side and you're trying to figure out what measures should we acquire and what measures shouldn't we, the avoided cost is that benchmark when you're finding that efficiency frontier. That incremental cost for serve represents the cost that could be avoided through that energy conservation. It's used as a guideline. You really want to compare these two resources. A little bit of an overview. So we've continued to evolve the avoided cost formula to create a more transparent and intuitive final number. This was an action item in our 2020 Oregon IRP. Staff has asked us to actually go into more detail about it, and we did during the Washington tag 3, but we're going to go over here as well. The changes that we've made to our distribution system costs. I'll talk about it a little bit later, but I think it gets more in line with some of the other utilities are doing as well. It's also, once again, a more intuitive process that I personally feel a lot more comfortable with. And then we've also changed the risk premium. I'm excited to talk about that because for the first time, we do have a positive value for risk premium. And I think that's important because there is some kind of quantitative value to the certainty of avoided costs versus the uncertainty of market exposure. And we talk a little bit about that here. So these various elements will need to be reconsidered with regards to emissions reduction goals. That's why we talk a little bit about using RNG as potentially that cost of commodity that gets to Mike's point about what is that next resource. It very well might be RNG. Talk about that carbon compliance element. That's a large part related to emissions reduction goals. We produce an expected avoided cost based on peak day, except for the case of distribution system costs, which are by our engineering team evaluated on peak hour. So there's a number provided on peak hour for that, which is then scaled up to peak day. So this is the formula. It's a lot more intimidating looking than it actually is. Basically, to get the avoided cost nominal, the AC nominal is the avoided cost nominal. It's the nominal costs for a given year. In order to put into real dollars, you just discount it by your discount rate, raised to the power of the number of years that you are from your reference year. So if you're 10 years out, you discount it by those 10 years to get what the real avoided cost is, to try to compare everything in a dollar-to-dollar perspective. That time value of money is actually an important aspect of avoided costs, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it when we talk about distribution costs. There's also transportation variable costs and fixed costs. Fixed costs are only really avoidable in the case, kind of like Ashton was talking about, if we were to look at one of those incremental transportation capacity acquisitions. So Zone 30W, for instance, if we needed more capacity out there, that's theoretically that fixed cost could be avoidable through energy efficiency, or at least deferrable, kind of getting into that deferrable concept that I'll talk about a little bit later. While variable costs are not, even if it wasn't traditional natural gas, even if it was renewable natural gas, if we're flowing it on, I'm sorry, it is avoidable. If we are flowing it on Northwest Pipe or GTN, whatever pipeline it is, by not flowing it, which we wouldn't have to do because of energy efficiency, we've just avoided that cost. So you have to record that. Storage costs really only come into play also in the case of like an on-system storage situation, which Cascade does not have. Northwest Natural being the bigger player in Oregon, some may be familiar with. They have their mist storage, which directly feeds into their Portland system, I believe. You could avoid those costs if you weren't flowing into that system, but since we don't have that, storage is really only a net positive for us in terms of commodity because there is some price arbitrage that can happen with storage. So that's not really a cost that would play for us, but we do put it in there if we ever were to pick up on system storage. It would be a part of that element. We already talked about commodity costs, environmental compliance costs. Those are based on the social cost of carbon. It's pretty well defined, I believe in both states, that for modeling purposes, we really are encouraged to use the social cost of carbon with 2.5% discount rates adjusted to real dollars for the year that you're doing the analysis in. And we do that for our IRP process. Distribution system costs and risk premium, I'm going to talk about in a little bit, some of the changes we've made for that. And then the environmental adder. One change to this that for those of you who have paid attention to our prior meetings, we used to only apply that to, I believe it was the commodity and the environmental aspect. And we've had some conversations with stakeholders. They've kind of helped point us to some literature, I believe from the ETO even, where they applied it to the entire calculation. And so we decided to line up with what everybody was doing. So taking that stakeholder feedback into consideration, we've gone ahead and applied it to our entire calculation. All right, so what hasn't changed, right? So the variable transportation costs, those are still pulled from the major pipelines we utilize. Fixed transportation costs, I already talked about, same with storage. Our commodity costs, those are taken from our price forecast still. Talked about the environmental compliance, and we already talked about the environmental adder. So those elements have not changed. But what has changed? Well, the two major ones, as I already alluded to, are distribution system costs and risk premium. With distribution costs, we've moved away from deriving it from margin. To give some background on that, I joined Cascade about 6 years ago, and I really started taking over avoided costs about 1 or 2 years into my time with Cascade, and really 3 or 4 or 1 or 2 years ago, 3 or 4 years into the process is when we really started to dig down into distribution system costs. And there was a lot that we didn't know about it. And there wasn't a defined way to do distribution costs. So we kind of thought about margin with our margin being kind of potentially an analog for money that we have to invest in our distribution system. And then we would back out growth from that. But something still felt a little bit weird about that. It felt like it was almost backing into the element that we really care about. And that's our forecasted capital expenses. So instead, for our new calculation, we look at those capital expenses directly. So not just trying to back them through March, but we look exactly at our forecasted capital expenses. We remove the ones that are related for like system integrity, because that's arguably not going to be avoidable. We need to be able to, distribution system enhancements that are related to pipe that may be a little bit older, system integrity, those need to be done. But if it's for growth, any kind of capital expense projects for growth are the ones that we're looking at. We also look at our load forecast to translate those to a per therm basis, specifically our peak day load forecast. We want to know what exactly is going to be the peak day growth that we're forecasting year over year, and then what is going to be the cost, because all of that is theoretically related to peak day, right? That's when you're going to need the enhancement. So that's the growth that we want to look at. It's also important to recognize energy efficiency probably will not be able to fully eliminate the need for a distribution system enhancement. But what it can do is defer the need for those enhancements to a later year. And because of that economic principle of the time value of money, there's value to this deferral. And that value is what we want to capture as our avoided distribution system costs. Since avoided cost is based on peak day, it's then multiplied by the ratio of peak day demand to average day demand, because those costs are going to be amortized over the entire year. But we really want to emphasize that it's a peak day valuation, not just a peak day, but in factuality, because of it's a distribution project, a peak hour valuation. So then, since it is peak hour, that daily number must be multiplied by the ratio of peak hour demand to that day's but technically actually peak hour demand to a regular hour demand. We want to see how much more impactful peak hour happens to be versus a typical hour on a particularly cold day. Once we make all of those, that helps get us that distribution system cost. To help explain this further, we have a little bit of a graphical example. So in terms of capacity modeling, right, we really want to explain the deferral capacity value. So here's an example where the horizontal line is our initial capacity and the diagonal line would be forecasted peak load. So in this situation, you'd see there eventually is a point where we're going to have a deficiency, and that's where those two lines intersect. So if you go to the next slide, Brian. That's that point of deficit right there. So one thing that you could do to change that point of deficit, the kind of quote unquote traditional way that distribution system planning would go about doing this, is by increasing your capacity. So go ahead and click over again, Brian. That'll be that new horizontal line, is that upgraded capacity. The new intersection point would be your new point of deficit. There's another way to look at it. What if you were to decrement your forecasted peak load? If you changed the slope of that line, unless you turned it flat, it would still at some point intersect with your initial capacity, because we're trying to not change the initial capacity, but we would intersect a lot later in time, or at least somewhat later in time. That change in time, that delayed point in deficit, is going to be the value that we're really interested in. So that's that new intersection point. By dropping down where the peak demand load is, you have that new delay point. And the difference between the two is going to be that deferral capacity. Now, one principle to note also is your rate of growth does impact how impactful this is. I think if you click forward, Brian, you'll see that if you had a much more flat rate of growth, by doing this and shifting it down further, you're going to have an even further out delayed point of deficit, and that's going to give you an even greater deferral capacity value. You want to go to the next slide? Another way to kind of look at this is, here are some nominal costs. These are just round numbers, but some nominal costs for a capacity increase, right? So the first bar is your current day costs, the middle bar is your point of deficit, and the furthest out bar is the delayed deficit. And so once again, these are your nominal costs. These are not adjusted for the time value of money. But because they're nominal costs, they're the costs that would actually be represented or reflected at that point in time, they're going to go up. Unfortunately, inflation is the buzzword that everybody keeps talking about, and it's a real thing that is happening now more than ever, for sure. And so costs go up. And so if you didn't do it today, if you did it out 3 years, as maybe represented by the bluer line, and or if you did it out 7 years, as represented by the gray, costs are going to continue to go up. However, that's the nominal value. Our actual discount rate not only accounts for inflation, but also the return that we get by not having to spend that money. If you kind of think about it, an example I like to use to explain this concept is, let's say we had $1 million today that we didn't need to spend, and let's say we were able to get our rate of return, which let's say is 7%. Let's say inflation is 4%. The fact that we are able to make an extra 3% over inflation, the real cost of that to us is going to go down. We're going to have more money to invest, and that's a benefit ultimately that does benefit our customers. So when you look at the real values, you'll see on the left, the y-axis has been changed to real dollars. You'll see that the real costs go down over time. And if you click over, Brian, that's ultimately what we're trying to capture, is how much does it go down by delaying that point of deficit, by changing it between the blue point and the gray point. That value is the present value of deferral, and that's the distribution system deferral capacity value that we include in our calculation. So that's distribution costs. We're really excited that we've changed that into it. We'll actually go over some of the numbers of it will be presented in the IRP itself, which we encourage people to kind of check out. It's a really cool calculation that we do. I think we include the workbook where we do it in one of the appendices, probably under, almost definitely under confidential treatment, because it does include capital projected expenses. But it's in there, and I think it's really cool stuff. The other cool thing that we've changed is our risk premium. So in the past, we've had some trouble with the risk premium. I think all the utilities have kind of had some trouble in trying to quantify what's the difference. So the risk premium, we define it as the difference between the impacts of potential extreme upward price movements versus that of extreme downward price movements. Now, if you think about it, energy efficiency is a hedge of some sort, right? By engaging in an energy efficiency project, that's now money that we don't have to be exposed to the market of. We have a known price for that measure, that energy efficiency measure that we might do. So there's a benefit if prices go up, we're locked in at a certain price. However, there is also a theoretical risk that if prices were to crater, we've made our energy efficiency acquisition decisions based on a higher price point. There is a risk between those two. The cool thing that we kind of realized when we were looking at doing this analysis is that because of the log normal of stochastic gas prices, the risk presented from rising prices typically exceeds that of falling prices. If you'll skip ahead, Brian, I'll kind of do a little bit of a Stats 101 reminder to explain what we mean by that. Here's a quick little visualization of normal versus log normal distributions. So the green line, or the green kind of wavy line is a normal distribution. You may have heard of it referred to as a Gaussian Gaussian or a bell curve. It's where both sides are equally distributed, and things like returns of natural gas prices are normally distributed, right? All else being equal, with not knowing any factors on any given day, there's an equal probability that the returns are going to go up to a certain degree or down to a certain degree. We have data to prove it. It's been documented. Same is the case for stock prices. They're all considered normally distributed, but that's returns. That's not actually the price itself. The price itself is log normally distributed, because the returns will have a higher impact going up versus going down. And that's what you end up seeing on the orange line. When you have a log normal distribution, more of the data may be centralized on that left end, but those higher ends are going to be more extreme. You're going to see, getting back to that concept we talked about earlier, more extreme high price movements versus low. A good way to think about it right now is Sumis was operating around $4 per decatherm. I would say for most of the time that I've been at Cascade, I think that's a fair number to peg it at, as just a round number's sake. Recently, we've seen it could go up to $10. It probably will never go negative, however. So more of the pricing is going to be on that left side, but it can go pretty high on that right side. That's what a log normal distribution looks like. And Brian, if you'll go back, it's that kind of theoretical principle that helps us get to the fact that the risk premium is going to be higher. We use this in a risk-adjusted price calculation, where the stochastic risk premium is compared to an annualized deterministic price to determine the final risk calculation. It's a lot of words. Let me show you some numbers to show you what I mean by that. If you go forward too. So here's a stochastic Sumis price simulation that we did, I think it was sometime around May, right? And what this particular simulation was modeling was what Sumis prices could be on November 1 of 2023. So the deterministic price input for that date was $5.36 per decatherm. That's what our price forecast says is what we expect the price of Sumis gas to be on that day. So now, remember, if you go back to that bell curve, the average of all of those values on the bell curve is what you expect it to be. It would be that deterministic price. So if it was normally distributed, the deterministic price and then the average would be exactly the same. But since it's log normally distributed, if you take not the average, but if you take the highest end and the lowest end and you average those two out, once again, on the normal distribution, because it's all symmetrical, those two values are going to equal your deterministic price. But since it's log normally distributed, if you take those two values and take an average, it's going to skew slightly to the right. And that's what you can see actually happen with this data. In this example, the average of those two price points was $6.07 per decatherm. That value in between is that stochastic risk premium. That's the stochastic element of the risk-adjusted calculation. And we'll go into what the full calculation is, I think, on the next slide. So the final calculation is as follows, and you may recognize this. This is it's something that I know Northwest Natural does as well. This risk-adjusted philosophy is something that we have kind of implemented as well, where you take your deterministic results and you weigh them 75%, and then you take that stochastic element I just mentioned, so that kind of gap in the middle, and you weigh that by 25%. So the deterministic price is going to have 75% weight, and then that higher price value you saw on that previous chart would be weighed by 25%. And this risk-adjusted price is then taken away from the deterministic price, and that resulting value is the risk premium. This captures the difference between expected pricing and a blend of deterministic and stochastic pricing. It is consistent, like I said, with some other regional LDCs in terms of how they do risk-adjusted calculations. It's also consistent with how we do risk-adjusted calculations. You may recall Brian mentioned earlier in this presentation that we have a risk-adjusted process that we can go into more detail about. I think we do in later tags for our scenario and sensitivity analyses. When we're evaluating those portfolios, we weigh stochastic results at 25% of that portfolio analysis and deterministic results 75%. So it's consistent with that process as well. One thing that I really like about this also is it captures the increasing uncertainty around pricing. That nominal risk premium generally increases over time. You'll see that in these results. One thing that's also cool, just because of the way statistics are for some of the earlier years, it actually did have a negative risk reduction value. There was more risk on the lower end, and that has to do with the fact that there isn't as much variance in those early years. For a point of clarification, consistent with UM 1893, for any values that were 0, I think we changed them to the levelized risk premium value. I think that's what it's either 0 or the levelized value, but I believe UM 1893 requires you to change it to the levelized value, which is what we did. But then you'll see as we go further into time, as the uncertainty around pricing increases over time, you have higher volatility, higher variance, you're going to see a higher risk premium. That's exactly the result that we get from this truncated to be able to fit the screen. So I'm really excited about this process. I think both of these changes, both the distribution changes and the risk premium changes, continue to allow us to become more accurate, come up with a more refined result that ultimately is going to create a better avoided cost, which is going to create better conservation potential assessments and more accurate IRP results. I think that's all I got. Oh yeah, so conclusion, we're continuing to improve what we're doing. We provided this avoided cost to both of our energy efficiency teams, so to Monica and her team in Bellingham for the Washington side, and to ETO. And I believe we actually have back, or are getting back, all of the conservation potential assessments that we will then be using to put into that Plexos modeling that Brian discussed. So a lot of words. I think we're pretty much coming up to the end here. So if anybody does have any questions, I am happy to go back into something. If you need to go, if you want to take it offline, one thing that Brian will probably get into is we're all about transparency and open, honest communication. You can reach out to us at any time about anything we've talked about today, and we're happy to discuss it with you. Although not next week for me because I'm on vacation.
Thanks, Devin. Yeah, are there any questions on avoided cost?
You've earned it, Devin.
Oh, thanks, Kathy.
Okay, I'm going to jump into the remaining schedule for the IRP. So the next tag meeting that we're going to host, it'll be on Washington. It's next month in a couple weeks, August 10th. We'll talk about carbon impacts, energy efficiency, renewable natural gas, and some preliminary results on our base case. Tag 4, same stuff. It'll be Oregon related items for those topics, and that's September 20th. Tag 5 for Washington, we'll have final integration results, finalization of plan components, and some action plan items. And that'll be September 28th. And then the Oregon version of that will be November 9th. We'll be filing our draft IRP in November 24th for Washington, and then the Oregon one will be at the beginning of the new year in January. And then we're giving stakeholders about a month and a half, 6 weeks, I think, to file some comments to us. If you have any edits or any additional narrative that you want to see, feel free to send those comments. We'll hold a 6th tag meeting if needed after we receive comments. So if we receive a comment that someone wants us to present on something, we can hold a 6th tag meeting. We've done it in the past where it was an hour-long meeting. So we'll do that if needed for both Washington and Oregon. And then our filing dates, Washington, we have February 24th, and Oregon, we have April 14th. So just next steps, like I mentioned, is tag 4. For Washington is next, August 10th, and then Oregon is September 20th. And these are the topics we'll be discussing. So I'm just going to open it up for last minute questions. If you have anything from something earlier on, like Devin had alluded to, here's our contact information. Feel free to reach out to us. You could also email just our general IRP@cngc.com. You can send us questions there. You can ask, we can set up a side conversation to talk about stuff if you have any questions. So I'm gonna open it up one last time for questions. I'll leave our contact information up if you want to jot anything down. Right. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'll let everybody go, and thanks for attending this meeting. We had some really good conversations, some good discussions, and some things to take away from this. And we look forward to chatting with everyone at Tag 4. All right, thanks everyone.